What's going on, MFs? Welcome back to the Snake Pit. Today, my guest is Nathan Pruitt. He is the owner and operator of Tumbleweed Bees. He is a beekeeper and a bee removal person. He has a bee removal service. My bad. But this is probably the most enlightening, insightful, I would say insightful podcast I've ever done. I'm glad that we had him on. I'm super excited, and I'm super excited for you guys to listen to this one. And maybe you'll learn a few things about bees and kind of how you can, maybe not kill them if you see them, or if they land in your yard, then you can call him or know what to do. But yeah, we definitely need to do our part, and not just trying to save the bees, but maybe helping farmers and conserving our resources that we have right now. So yeah, not to get into all that, but yeah, this was a really good one. It's entertaining. It's fun. It was really fun. And I'm super thankful that he came on and kind of taught us about his world, man. It was awesome. Hope you guys enjoy this. And if you're new, please hit that subscribe button. Even if you don't watch, we put it on in the background or something. I don't know. But this is also on iTunes and Spotify. So thanks, guys. And like I said, I always usually say I hope you enjoy this. I know you're going to enjoy this one, and I hope you can take something out of it and help do your part, not just as an American, but as like a human on planet Earth. And I'm serious when I say that. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you. Let's get her started and excited. All right. Can you please introduce yourself to the people out there if they don't know who you are?
My name is Nathan Pruitt, and I'm the owner of Tumbleweed Bees.
Bradley, can you turn that fan down to like calm? It's that one. One more, press one more. There you go. What is it called?
Tumbleweed Bees.
Hell yeah. So you're a beekeeper?
I am.
How did you get started in that? Can you tell me about that? Tell me man, this is cool. I'm so excited.
Well, I live out in the country, kind of beyond the Friendship High School. And I got into gardening probably around in 2014 or so. And I really liked watermelons. And so we were growing watermelons and got great crops, just 30-pound watermelons pretty consistently for about 2 years. And then my neighbor found a gigantic beehive under a shed and had it removed. In my following 2 to 3 years, the watermelons were about the size of a softball to, a little bit bigger, and they just weren't fully developing. And you'd spend the whole growing season trying to grow these big watermelons, and it just wasn't working out anymore. So I was starting to look into bees, because really I wasn't much into bees at all. I was kind of scared of them. And I realized that there was a pollination issue out there where I was. It's pretty cultivated. Most of the land's plowed for cotton. And there just didn't seem to be any pollination going on out there. So I looked into it, and I started studying, various podcasts, YouTube videos, and various books. And I didn't want to just jump into it and get bees. I have 3 kids. I've got neighbors. I didn't want to create a dangerous situation. So I told myself that if I felt confident after doing my research that I could do this, that I would start. And I did. Started in April of 2019. The reason why we're called Tumbleweed Bees is the very first bees that we ever got, we found as a swarm on a tumbleweed in my neighbor's front yard. And so if you see us on like Facebook or something, the profile picture is a tumbleweed with a bunch of bees on it.
Yeah, can you go to Facebook? I think it might be on there. So they'll plant anywhere. Will they?
Well, a swarm is not a hive itself. Like a swarm is basically a traveling hive looking for a new home.
Oh, okay.
So they had stopped to rest there for the night, it looked like, because they showed up in the evening, and I basically got them in the morning when they were still there, but they probably would have taken off soon after that. Mm-hmm. And so I put them in a box, I started taking care of them, and fixed my gardening issue. But what happened is over time I became more of a beekeeper and less of a gardener because the bees took that much attention.
Dang. So you really have, prior to this, you had no background with bees.
Mm-mm.
And it's just self-taught?
A lot. Actually, most of it is self-taught. There was a few people that I did kind of combine, like just there was the former superintendent at Motley County ISD, Andrew Segrist, was a guy that I knew kept bees, and so I'd ask him questions. The fire department out there would usually call him for help on bee removals and things, and I think he had 15 hives. He actually took us out there once to his hives before I was an actual beekeeper, because I was working in school districts back then as an insurance agent. I was writing retirement accounts for teachers, and we were working in his school, and he took us out there once, and he had a ton of hives, and the main one he wanted to show us was an Africanized hive. One of his hives had Africanized, and he was trying to take care of it, and I didn't want to get out of the truck, and I didn't. The other guy I was with did. They had suits on, and it was just like a tornado of bees. It was
Africanized? What does that mean?
They're very aggressive. Africanized bees are very dangerous. They will try to kill you.
Does that mean they're from Africa, or does it just mean they just get something in them or something?
No. Yes and no. Essentially, I think it was back in the early 90s, somewhere in that time frame. Some researchers in Brazil were trying to crossbreed different genes from a European bee and a certain species of African gene bees. And they were blending them together. They were trying to get the honey production of an Africanized hive, because their honey production was very strong, and they were also very resilient to diseases. And they were blending it with the European bee, or more they were called Italians, I believe. And they were trying to crossbreed because the Italians were gentle, where the African genes were not, but they were better producers. So they're trying to mix the two to create basically the perfect bee, where they were gentle, but just great honey producers and also resilient to diseases. Well, then they had a really bad storm, and I think it was a kind of like a hurricane, but they call it something different down there. And it destroyed the building, and the bees got out.
Oh, it was like Jurassic World type shit.
Yeah. Yeah. And those bees were not nice. Their experiments had I don't want to say failed, but they weren't ready to be released. And those got out, and they spread in South America. They came up through Mexico, and then they were most predominantly in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California. And they're sparsely out there now in the United States, more north of us, but they're not as prevalent. Recently, they finally discovered a hive of Africanized bees in Hawaii just a few years ago. So they're still kind of spreading, but for the most part, you don't really hear about it anymore. And beekeepers know how to fix it too. But that's...
So he brought you out to one of those?
Yeah, this was way before I was into bees, and I just didn't get out of the truck. And I was seeing all these bees outside, and they're on their suits, and I'm thinking to myself, gosh, they got to get back in their car that I'm in, and they're going to have all those bees on. But thankfully, I wasn't stung or anything. But it's a hazard you have to be aware of. We still have issues with Africanized bees out here. I mean, someone in Austin recently, a tree cutter, got killed by them just from the last 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah.
Is that similar to what happened in 2020 when you were hearing all about the killer bees that were on their way over here?
Those were wasps, I think.
Oh, they were wasps.
Those are
they melt your
Asian
skin.
giant hornets.
Oh, yeah.
Or they call them the murder hornets. Africanized bees, in my opinion, are more dangerous just because there's more of them.
Is it because they have a better community more than anything?
Well, the sheer volume is much greater.
Oh, okay.
Volume is probably the issue there.
So that guy who died, did he die because the volume of it, or was he kind of allergic? Or
what he was anchored in a tree. Like he was a tree cutter, so he was up high, and he was anchored. So if he was on a ladder, but he had anchored himself in case his ladder came out from underneath him. And tree cutters, if they know that there's bees on that tree, they won't cut it because they know that there's dangerous. But if they don't see it before they get up there, it's a different story. He obviously didn't find it first. So he had crawled up there, anchored himself in. He was probably 12 feet off the ground. And there was a beehive in a tree hollow up there. And I don't know what hit it or what stirred up the bees, but usually you have to do something to stir those bees up. So something probably hit close to that entrance and set off the guard bees. They secrete a pheromone kind of smells like WD-40.
Really?
You can smell it. And it's like a chain reaction. They'll set it off. The next bees next to them will set it off, and it sets off this aroma in the air.
That's how they communicate, right?
And
With the pheromones?
Yeah, the pheromones. It's one of the many ways they do. Yeah, they communicate through.
I've heard of with the way they flap their wings. Is that one of them? Like the vibrations or something?
Yes and no. It's for different things, and we'll come back to that in a second. But the bees swarmed out, and they started stinging him. And in the chaos, he gets scared, and and his ladder comes out from underneath him. And he falls, but his anchor holds him, but he's probably still 8-10 feet up in the air, and he can't get off.
Oh, okay.
And they're stinging him like crazy.
So he was just stuck in it.
He was stuck in it.
That's so bad.
And he was screaming for help, and by the time help got there, he was already gone.
So I just looked this up. It says the average adult could withstand more than 1,000 stings, whereas 100 stings could kill a child.
I think
So I guess
it's 500.
500. So I guess that's like if you're not allergic, you can handle.
Yeah. Most commercial guys that deal with thousands of hives, big commercial operations that do almond pollination, they'll have 20, 30,000 hives. And they keep track of their stings, and they don't try to go over 20 stings a day. And as long as they stay under 20 stings a day, they feel like they're doing pretty good.
Because over time, that puts some wear and tear on you, right?
Yeah, I've heard it both ways, and I don't know which is which, but I've heard that it can lead to a vulnerability of the venom to where you can become allergic. But I've also heard it can create an immunity. I've heard it both ways, and I really don't know which is which. It may just be based on the person.
It has to mess with your DNA somehow, right? Eventually.
So prior to you once you started dealing with bees, had you been stung by a bee before?
Mm-mm. I've been stung by wasps, but not bees.
And I imagine you've been stung since then, right?
Oh, yeah. It's quite common. I've lost count. You don't even count it anymore. You almost get used to it. And have you ever nicked or touched a hot curling iron with your skin somewhere?
I've been stung once by a bee.
It feels like a hot curling iron.
Have you?
Like if you took your finger and touched a hot curling, you don't feel the stinger. You feel the heat of the venom. That's what you feel. And it's not pleasant. It's a showstopper. Like you touch that hurt curling iron, it makes
Is it like that weird, like painful numbness that's just hot for a second?
Yeah.
Wait, so you've never been stung by a bee, though?
I've been stung by ants.
Oh,
And I've also
it's much more
touched,
painful.
and I've also, I do hair, so that is my life, just touching a flat iron or curling iron. I'm like, oh, it's hot.
What is that compared to a scorpion? Like, would a scorpion still be...
You would feel the pierce of a scorpion stinger.
I think the bee hurt worse. I've been stung by both.
I think the bee hurts worse, but the stinger you feel the stinger. It's like a needle.
And sometimes scorpions hold on, then they sting you.
Well,
They're bastards.
bees can put pressure on it too. I mean,
Yeah, I'm sure.
You can hear them. Like when I'm wearing my veil and I'm dealing with some really angry bees, it's not just, and it's not like they're just flying around and then get on you. It's like a dart. Like, bam, they come and they hit, and then you hear their wings, like their wings.
Like flapping?
Well, it's like it's flapping so fast. Like you have a normal bee buzz, but then when all of a sudden when they're trying to sting you and they come at you like a dart and they're on your veil, you can hear them pushing with their wings. It's almost like a drill.
Oh, man.
Like it's like.
Is that evolution? Like they've evolved to do that? To be pretty efficient at stinging you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I don't know about the evolution side of it, but just and they were a colony-based species, I think, before they had stingers, and I think the stinger came up later, but it was still they're a marvel.
Is it true that once they sting you, that single bee that stings you, they die?
Yes.
So why is that? Is it just because they put so much energy into that, where they just let go?
Their stinger's barbed. It's like a fishing hook almost.
Uh-huh.
Or really more, it's like a harpoon.
Mm-hmm.
So when it sticks you, they can't, when they pull it out, their whole stinger and guts come out with it, because when they come out, it's pulling their entire guts out. So and it will continue to pump venom in you, because you can see the venom sac on the stinger when they leave.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it still pumping. Yeah.
Wow.
So you're supposed to pull the stinger out?
Yeah, and I use my nails. I just kind of claw it out, and it comes out pretty easily. Like, it doesn't hurt coming out. I mean, it's hurting because you're stung.
I had no idea.
Look up how many people are allergic to bees. Because I'm sure that's...
This is
Another
going to
thing.
be a misconception, and you're going to get different stats from different sites. So I listen to multiple podcasts that are university-based. The main one I like to listen to is called Two Bees in the Podcast, and they run the honeybee lab out of Florida University. And they have actually done studies on this. And there's a misconception because, like, you can get stung and it looks like an ant bite. Like, it doesn't look bad. That's usually how mine look when I get stung. But then there are some people, they'll get stung on their hand and then they'll get some swelling. Like their hand will kind of swell up. They call that a local reaction. Now, when that happens to people, they think they're allergic. And they're really not. It's just the way that your body's reacting to it. The people who are allergic are the ones that go into shock when they're stung. Like one sting, like their throat will swell up or they just go into shock. Those are the people that are really in danger of bees. Like if you're one of those that will just swell up from a sting,
That happened to me.
you can still survive a lot of stings. You might just swell up. But if you feel like your throat is choking, that's a different story. You're allergic to bees. It's in a dangerous way, and you need an EpiPen to defeat that.
So if you're ever in the case, God forbid it does happen, but like if a swarm of bees do come after you, I mean, what's technically the best thing to do? Like, I mean, because I've heard you're not supposed to run because I've heard like
The heat?
the heat of your body. Because I mean, this is just stuff I've heard.
Now we can debunk all this.
I would say the best thing to do is to get indoors and shut the door behind you. There will still be bees on you, but there will be less.
What about if there's a body of water?
You can try that, but the bees aren't going to leave immediately
Really?
because you're going to have stingers in you at that point.
Mhm.
And even when you go into the water, the trail of that pheromone from the venom sac,
Mhm.
they can smell it. And so they're going to hover where they last smelled that. So you can go under and they're probably just going to kind of just be swirling around that area because that's where they last smelled the pheromone. So if you do that, go under and swim away.
And you're already in such shock where you're not going to be able to hold your breath underwater too.
Yeah, probably not. But I mean, the best thing I've heard is just try to get indoors and shut the door. You're still going to get stung, but bees react differently when they get inside a vehicle or if they get inside a house. They realize that they're kind of closed off and they want to get out. And so you'll see them kind of go to the windows, kind of like a fly. So that would probably be my advice is just to get away from the hive as quickly as possible. And that would mean running. What they're chasing is they're chasing the smell of the alarm pheromone and the venom, like the venom gland. Those two smells are putting them on high alert. But when they're first attacking, they're going to your breath because they've evolved from basically predators like bears, skunks, and any other creatures that try to eat them. They're attracted to the sensitive part of the body, and they've learned over time that the mouth and the nose typically are what deter those kind of predators. So when they smell your breath or they feel the heat from your breath, they're automatically going to come to your face.
So is that probably why where I've heard don't run because you're already breathing so much and panting?
Maybe, but the
Maybe.
thing
Maybe
is-
this was wasps.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wasps, they're a little different, but in terms of what you're saying is if you don't hurry, the more time you're spending trying to get away from them, the more likely you're going to not be in a good situation.
Okay.
So I would say if that is the case to where they're traveling from what you've heard, if you're not getting out of there as quickly as possible, every second that you delay in an aggressive situation, the more likely you're going to die. I
Man.
hate to say that.
Yeah.
So that may be what they're chasing, but if you don't get out of there quick, you're in trouble.
Can you answer this question? Like, what is like the hierarchy of like a bee colony? How does that operate?
Well, let's break it down further. Are you talking about the importance of hive survival, or are you talking about who makes the decisions?
Well, because you said something about like tracker, or like certain bees will come out. If you make noise on their hive, a certain bee will come out. Like,
Okay.
how do they know what bee? Obviously, there's the queen, right? And can you go down from the queen? Like, how does it? Who makes the decisions and whatnot?
Well, in that case, if you're stirring up a hive, it's the guard bees. Now, the guard bees, they're in the prime of life. They're about 30 days old. Bees only live about 40 to 46 days. They don't live very long. They're in the spring and summer months. They're in the winter months. They can live up to three months. But the guard bees, let me just go through this. When a bee's born, they can't fly. Within about 10 days of them being born, their wings are strong enough and dry enough that they can fly. Once they're at that point, they're at the peak of their life. Like their bodies are strong, they're not worn out, their wings are in good shape. Those are typically going to evolve into your guard bees. And the bigger your hive is, the more guard bees they're going to be. Now, they'll do that for 5-10 days, and then they evolve into, I should say evolve. They grow into the position of a forager. Okay, so those are the ones that are going to go out and go to the flowers. So whenever you see a bee on a flower out here, it's one of the oldest bees in their hive.
Okay.
Because they're the most experienced, life experience. They've handled situations by that point, and they just know how to survive. And that now bees, once they're at that point, they're getting eaten by birds, spiders. Like there's tons of predators for bees, wasps.
Killed by ignorant people, all of that, right?
Yeah. And then when they're really, really old, they usually turn into water gatherers. Usually when you see the ones gathering water, their wings are frayed because they've been flying for so long. And those guys don't typically live very long, and they'll die pretty quick. And if you'll notice, a lot of times when you have bees visiting like a bird bath, there'll be birds around just waiting for them, just to pick them off. It's kind of interesting to watch. But that's typically a bee from start to finish. And usually when they can't fly and they've just been born, those are nurse bees, and they're extremely important. Like a bee's life, every single stage is of equal importance. The queen is the exception here, because without the queen, they're doomed. But even when they're first born, they're cleaning the hive. They're the undertakers. They carry out the dead. They feed the queen. The nurse bees, essentially, it's like the heart of the hive. It's pumping the blood. It's feeding everything. Your guard bees is like your immune system. They're the ones keeping the hive safe, and then the foragers are the ones that are bringing the food in. So every single stage is extremely important. And if you look at the queen, I wouldn't call her the brain, because she doesn't necessarily make the decisions, but she's the glue. Her pheromone is what keeps the hive together. She's definitely a matriarch type character, and the bees will not leave her in any situation. And she's laying about 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day. And then she'll live up to, their maximum life expectancy is about 5 years. But I have not had a queen make it beyond 2.5 years out here.
Is this what you mean right here? They won't leave.
She's marked by the color, right?
Yeah, the beekeeper in this scenario has marked that queen. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's not natural.
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay.
No, in fact, the color matters for the beekeeper, because the color actually tells you her age. Since the queens don't live beyond 5 years, you can actually make a color code system. So right now we're in the year of the yellow. So I think it's, gosh, I just did a post about this. I can't remember the end, but if the year ends in a 2, it's a yellow. If the year ends in a 1, it's a white. And I think the next one's red. So that's
this is your post. So okay. This is what I guess y'all's mark questions. Right there.
What?
So this is y'all's right here. Mm-hmm. So that's the color that. So what is it? Y'all just like.
It helps us see her on the comb, because when you have tens of thousands of bees in a beehive, it can, even though she looks different, it's like trying to find Where's Waldo puzzle. Mm-hmm. Really? It can be still really hard to see her. And sometimes the bees can be on top of her. Sometimes she can be hiding in a corner. So the dot actually helps us visually see her. Now, on top of that, the dot color will change. Like if we get a new queen next year, I believe the color will be red.
What's like the dot? Is it just like a Like, what are you putting on it?
We have a tool. Well, it's basically a glorified Sharpie.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I didn't know if anything.
It's a different texture, but like we have to order it, and it basically works like a Sharpie. And we have a tool that holds her down, and then we just paint it on her thorax.
So is the whole basically the whole purpose of a hive, is it to protect the queen? Almost like everything has to do with the queen's survival.
Well, in terms of defensive behavior, they're protecting their brood, their food stores. Imagine you're in a world where there's no governor or there's no kind of government, and it's pure anarchy. Essentially, that's the insect world, and so you're having to defend against anything that's a threat. And if you've got food and people know you have food, you're a target. That's why wasps like honey. Various other kinds of predators like honey. Believe it or not, skunks eat honey and bees at the same time. Raccoons,
Just take a bite out of it.
Oh yeah, even mice. Even mice will go up into a hive and they'll start eating the wax and the honey as well. So they have to be defensive just in nature, because their food is, without their food, if they don't have enough going into winter, they die.
This is literally A Bug's Life. The Disney movie. That's exactly what I'm relating it to. They all worked as a little society, and this is so interesting. But I'm I don't know if you agree with that, but I'm really relating this to A Bug's Life.
Do you think
I've only seen it once,
cooler.
and it was a long time ago, and it was before I was a beekeeper, so I'd have to rewatch it.
you should watch it?
Yeah, it was from when I was really
the bee
little.
movie is terrible.
No, that's not.
It's awful.
No, I'm talking about A Bug's Life.
That's a wild
Disney
That's a way
Pixar.
different movie. Yeah, you should
That's
go watch
literally
that.
what I just.
Because there's a queen
really
too.
Can
And,
you
Yeah.
explain to me this? What is the difference? So bees produce honey and wax.
Mhm.
So what's the difference? Why is there a difference? And why do they do both of those kind of things?
Well, let's start with the wax, because they will make wax first. So let's assume you've got a swarm, and let's kind of break down what a swarm is. So let's say we've got a beehive in a water box or a water meter box. So in your alley in the back, you probably have a city-based water box. Bees love that. We get tons of removal requests from those water boxes. Well, it's not a whole lot of space. Once they get too big, they'll grow a new queen. And when that queen gets to the point where she's about to be born, half of that hive and the old queen will leave. And they'll gorge themselves with honey and anything else they can take with them. And they'll go find a new hive, or they'll go find a new home, and they'll start building. And the first thing that they build is wax. Okay. And they're having to use the carbohydrates from the honey to have the energy to produce that wax. And they secrete it from their abdomen. So imagine your six pack here, and it's just secreting this fat. Essentially, beeswax is just bees fat.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And they chew it up, and they can mold it. And they literally, they'll take that and they'll put it in their mouths and chew it up, and then they'll mold it. And that's where you get all the cells. Okay.
Those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cells behind.
Oh,
that.
okay.
Okay. And it's white at first.
Sometimes I get
Do you have that- The holes.
Yeah, no, that's why I moved my chair. No, y'all keep watching.
You
That's
have
why
that-
I'm
what is
looking
it?
at you.
So
Take it off.
they'll mold that wax to the size, and it's perfect. They have different size cells for different functions. So they'll mold it into normal honey cells, or they'll do drone cells, which drones are the males. The whole hive is female, except for certain times of the year during the spring and early summer, they'll have drones, and the drones look like big horseflies. They don't look like normal bees. If you were to see one crawling on the table, you probably wouldn't recognize it as a bee. It would probably be a big horsefly. And so they're bigger. They're bigger than the female. So the cell size will grow. And so at that point, once the wax is built, they'll start collecting pollen. Okay, and they have little sacs on the sides of their legs, and they'll start storing all the pollen there, and that's where pollination happens for the flowers as well, or the crops. Well, while they're pulling pollen, they got this really long tongue, and if you look at it close, it kind of forks in this direction and kind of goes forward. I don't think I have any pictures of that.
Yeah, I'm about to Google that.
But it kind of forks out, and there's a center one, and it's long. It's almost the length of their body, and that's where they suck up the nectar. and nectar is about 80% water and 20% sugar in most cases. And then they carry it in this kind of a nectar stomach pouch. Okay. Bees have essentially two stomachs. There's a normal stomach where they put their nectar and they can regurgitate that kind of like a bird. And then they have a honey sac. And when they get back to the hive, when they feed each other, and so they'll literally regurgitate through this tongue. It's like a straw, and they'll regurgitate it in between bees. And each time this nectar gets refined in each and every bee. And so in this honey sac or stomach, it's gaining these enzymes. It's converting this nectar from 80% water, 20% sugar, to now it's over time through all these bee regurgitations, it's turning it into 80% sugar, 20% water. And this is why honey lasts forever. It's because the pH level can get to the point to where bacteria can't grow in it at all. In fact, the honey if you get perfect honey, it will suck the water out of bacteria cells. Like that's how oppressive honey environment is to bacteria. And that's why it can last forever. Well, bees know when it's perfect. And then when it is, they'll store it in that cell. And then when that cell completely fills up with honey, they'll cap it off. And it's just like a wax cap. And that's how you know it's perfect. So whenever us as beekeepers are harvesting honey, we know when to harvest a certain frame of honey based off, is it all capped? Because if the entire frame is capped, we already know it's going to last forever and it's perfect. And the bees know how to do that. I see your face.
Yeah.
Can we buy
So
some honey?
like how long?
I'm sold out right now.
Oh,
Yes, I do want to purchase some. And I want to try honeycomb.
me too.
Yes. But how long, like how many days, or is that like an hourly process for them, like that kind of cycle, or like how, you know what I mean? Like for like one little.
I don't think I can answer that at a scientific level at all.
Like do you
But
know?
I'll give you kind of a time frame from
Okay.
my perspective.
Okay.
So usually in our area, we only get about we call them honey flows. And that's usually when there's an abundance of flowers. Okay. There's typically more flowers than there are bees. And so for us in this area, it's when the cotton blooms. Have y'all seen cotton? When it blooms, it's all white and the fields are just white flowers everywhere. When that happens, it's like the bees go into overdrive. And there's just so much nectar coming into the hive. Last year, it bloomed on August 5th. And by September, I want to say somewhere between the 15th and 21st, all of our hives were full of it. So, I mean, about a month and a half, it went from almost nothing to honey frames being filled in all the hives in about a month and a half.
Okay.
Now, they're constantly produced. Like I can pull out frames right now, and there's some frames already ready, and it's wildflower honey. Like, and that's fine. But I don't like pulling those unless the hive needs the room for the cotton flow. And typically when they come out of winter, they're really weak and they're trying to build up their numbers, and that takes time. And then usually right now they're already pretty big, but right now, heading into August, bee populations are getting close to max. Like we're as large as they're going to get. And then when the cotton flow hits in August, it's on. You've got max pop going into those fields, and they're pulling in, I don't know how much, but we pulled off just 6 hives. I think we pulled out 160 pounds of honey with just 6 hives.
Wow.
And this year we have 10 hives. 9 of them are ready to go right now.
Can we reserve a pound of honey from you right now on the podcast?
As long as you can follow me on my Facebook page, and I'll make the announcement when I'm ready. But
I follow you, so I go, okay.
That's usually where I make my sales. I'll just let everyone know, and then people send messages and so forth. But we ran out in March from last year because I'm not actively like pushing sales. I'll just make a post, hey, we have honey, and then over time it kind of sells out. And so I think I put it on sale sometime in October last year. And then by February or March, we were out completely. And that was about 160 pounds worth. Each jar, you get a pound of honey with each jar, the way we sell it. And so it's not like it flies off the shelf. I mean, people want local honey, but you're also competing with other local beekeepers, and there's some good ones here in this area.
Shout out to them, but we're after yours.
I have more questions.
Okay.
Okay, so is wildflower honey not good?
No. I didn't mean to make it sound like that.
Okay.
We just don't get a honey flow for wildflower very consistently in our area because there's not enough flowers.
That's what I was going to ask also. Like,
is that because the cotton fields are being plowed? You know, they plow everything.
Well, they plow everything, and oftentimes they will. It's basically the weed kill.
Oh.
So most of those wildflowers are weeds, and they don't want them growing and spreading onto their land, and so typically they'll kill that. And it's usually on the dry crop areas. So like if you go out to a cotton field, they got that spigot in the middle that rotates in a circle, and then your four corners is usually where most of your weeds are growing, and then the side of the roads. Okay, and so oftentimes those farmers will plow it, put a cover crop on it, or they'll just straight up kill it, and then they'll plant. And that hurts us. Usually, if you have bees in town and they're pulling from like your yards, you'll actually get a honey flow here in town before the cotton flows. The problem is the city regulates the bees. Mm-hmm. You can have them in your backyard, but they are a danger. And there are laws in place to protect your neighbors. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, if your neighbors find out you're a hive, you're going to get reported because people are scared of them. But if you're able to keep a hive within a residential area like this, you would probably get a honey flow right about now.
That's what I was going to ask also. It's like with like the wildflower thing, it's like, do people ever like have enough land to like have like the bees there and also just like plant like a shit ton of like wildflowers? Well, or is that not smart, or is that just not how it works? Because I'm thinking about this like with like farming, and like Robin, like he has grass all over, you know, so I don't know.
No, I think his stuff it's like that. They put stuff over it to kill all that stuff.
Yeah. But bees are everywhere, right? Because I know it's dry here, but let's say like in the deserts in Arizona, are they out there too?
Oh yeah, mm-hmm.
Really. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But to kind of expand on what you were saying, so right now, one of the best places to put bees because of everything's being plowed is actually CRP land. Do you know what CRP land is? It's land that the government is usually they're paying. It's land that the government is usually paying the farmer to not cultivate. And they're trying to let the nutrients kind of replenish themselves, let the plant life kind of recover. There's quite a bit of CRP land, but most farmers don't realize that they can put bees on it. So right now, I'm actually talking to a guy who owns some CRP land of 42 acres. And he just basically goes out there and hunts quail occasionally when they're in season. And so he's actually asked me to come put some beehives out there. Now we're still talking about it. We're both really busy. But I've got a Grunt's Bee Farm. If you ever go to the farmer's market, Grunt's Bee Farm, he is a local guy selling local honey. And he's actually right next to some CRP land. And on occasion, he will get a honey flow from that CRP land of wildflowers coming up because they can't be destroyed. They can't be plowed. They can't be poisoned. CRP land is protected. So you can, if you get enough rain, you can get honey flows from those wildflowers. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, and I have another question. So on my tangent. Okay, so I saw this video on TikTok about like a pudding that you can make with like avocado and honey, but it has to be like Manuka honey, right? So I wanted to go buy Manuka honey, but it was very expensive. What is that? What is so different? Is that what you showed me yesterday? Yeah. So I mean, I've been pricing it like at Sprouts, HEB, Market Street. We're talking like starting price like $27. You know what I mean? I'm
surprised it's that cheap.
Okay, but we also saw some like as high as like 65.
Mm-hmm. That's probably what I was thinking. So Manuka honey,
is it worth the price?
It depends on how you want to use it.
Okay.
If you're just wanting honey to sweeten things, no, it's not.
Okay.
Manuka honey is valuable because of the properties that are in it, and its location is extremely important. Mm-hmm. Manuka honey is supposed to only come from New Zealand.
Oh, I saw that. I saw it when we were looking at it.
It's only supposed to come from New Zealand, and it's the Manuka. It's either a tree or it's a plant. I think it's an actual tree. It's a crop tree, and the bees, when they pollinate those trees, they're pulling the nectar from that Manuka tree, and there's some, I don't know what's in it, but there are elements of that honey that are uses. You can use them in medical ways, like for health, and it's probably I won't say the best. It's probably the most versatile honey in the world because of the properties that are in it. So if you're wanting to make a certain kind of thing that is good for your body in terms of helping you be healthier, or if you've even got cuts, or if you got some kind of rash, or like, it's got medical properties to it. And that's one of the reasons why it's so valuable. And what jacks up the price is, after discovering this, everybody wants it. Mm-hmm. So you got high demand, low supply, and you've got you're shipping it from New Zealand. So there's three huge factors that's jacking that price up. Now, because of that, China has started producing, and some other countries, I should say countries, there are people in those countries that are making fake versions of that to try to jump. Oh, fake honey it's the third most, honey in general is the third most fake food in the world. Behind, I know what number one is milk. Milk can be faked. And there's something else, but honey was number 3.
In terms of, like, they label it as something that it's not. It's
not. So, like, most fake honey that comes from, like, China, for example, is rice starch that has a mixture. They mix it with some things that make it taste and makes it taste like honey and has a texture of honey. But it's completely fake. And so, like, you can go to the grocery store right now, let's say go to United, and you can find a pound of honey for about $4. Mm-hmm. That is killing beekeepers in this country, to the point to where the government is actively trying to fight against it. And they've put tariffs on honey coming in from other countries, and they refuse to buy from China, period, because it's mostly fake. And so that's why they always tell you don't buy store-bought honey. Well,
buy local, support local. That's what that means.
But here, there's a caveat to that.
Oh, hell.
There always is.
There's a caveat to this. So let's take our area, for example. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of deviating a little bit too fast, but what I'm trying to get to is there's a ton of fake honey out there. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's probably more fake honey than real honey in the world right now. And China gets around it, our restrictions. They'll basically sell it to, like, Malaysia, and then Malaysia will sell it to us. So they use middlemans to get around us, and
they'll just find loopholes.
They find loopholes. So to kind of turn around. So, like, if I wanted to sell my honey in United, which I would love to do, and I think they would really like it too. Mm-hmm. The problem is the kind of honey we get out here, most of it is cotton, and cotton honey is actually delicious.
I would like to try some.
It's wonderful. The problem is it's so dry and arid out here that the honey will crystallize in a matter of weeks. So it goes from, a good liquid substance to hard within about a month, maybe a month and a half. And because of that, you can still eat it hard. It's still delicious, okay? But the consumer is used to that style of liquid honey. So if you're looking at a shelf at United and you're looking at local honey, are you going to buy the one that's already crystallized, or are you going to buy the one that's not? And the one that's not is the one that's going to sell, and they know that. And that's fine. We can't fix that, okay? Mm-hmm. Because the only way I can make that honey not crystallized is to heat it up and pasteurize it. Mm-hmm. And that kills the whole element of it being local, because you're killing the enzyme inside the honey to make it do that. And so that's the only way to give it a longer shelf life that makes it worth their time. And then the second thing is volume. So our area, I predict, and this is an estimate, but based off the beekeepers that I do know and how much I produce and how much they produce, I'm willing to bet that there's probably less than 5,000 pounds produced locally on an annual basis that we actually sell. Now, there are some commercial guys in the south part of Texas that do sell honey up here, and they call it local, but really it's just Texas honey. Okay. But it's mostly done in South Texas. Okay. And so it's not.
You can rock with that.
It's not really local to our area. It's not going to help you with your cotton allergies. It's not going to help you with your other allergies. It's going to taste like honey. It's going to taste good, but it's from South Texas.
Okay.
So cotton honey can help you with your cotton allergies? Is that kind of an idea people have?
It depends on who you talk to, but yes, yeah. It's helped me.
So just like the Manuka honey, any type of honey, they all have like certain type of like medicinal advantages?
All unpasteurized honey has medicinal purposes.
Okay.
Because it goes back to that bacteria comment that I made. Because if you've got a cut that looks infected, it's like a bacterial infection, you can put honey on that, and the honey will literally suck the water out of bacteria. Yeah, if it's good honey, because that's how it kills it. Like it's based off pH levels, and I don't know the science behind it, but I've seen enough content that says that it literally sucks the water out of the bacteria cells, and that's why you can use it. Now Manuka's got some additional properties that make it better. But in terms of what you were saying, and I kind of refreshed me. I got off topic there.
I was saying like the cotton honey might help you with your cotton allergies, right?
So I don't know if it's because I'm actually in the beehives and I'm probably getting exposed to their pollen as well as the honey.
Oh, okay.
But I have honey every single day in my coffee. That's what I use to sweeten my coffee. This honey here and this coffee here is from Morton, and there's tons of cotton fields out there. But before I was a beekeeper, I was taking
that's what I'm
Claritin.
gonna start doing. Okay.
I used to have to take Claritin almost every single day, especially when they were ginning the cotton, because those gins will gin it up, and it's like they
It
spew
rocks a lot of people's world, man.
Oh man, it used. I was driving from Dimmitt to Plainview one time, and my throat, like I was having like almost an asthma attack, and I don't have asthma. And so, but since I've been doing this and having, basically a spoonful of honey in my coffee every day, I don't have to do that anymore. But and I think if you were just to do it once or twice, I don't think it's going to help you. I think you have to do it consistently and kind of let it build up in your system, because there are people who buy it and they might just buy one jar, and then when they run out, the symptoms come back. So you got to keep it in your system. It's not going to be a permanent solution, but there are scientists out there who have actually done studies on this. And I don't know what the parameters of the studies was, but they have seen that the pollen content in the honey is not high enough to make an effect on your allergies. But it worked for me. And I don't know how to explain it. It worked for me. And I think it's because I'm doing it every single day.
Not to get into like a big conspiracy, do you think there's a big pushback from pharmaceutical companies against this? No, it's just not really.
Not enough people consume honey.
It's just not been. Oh, okay, that's what it is.
Yeah.
You think that's because they're scared of bees? Kind of like you were saying, like keeping a beehive here might scare some folks.
No, I don't think it's that. I think it's a lack of people just don't know that it can affect their allergies, and I think some people expect an immediate result as well, and if they don't see that immediate result, they don't think it works. But like I said, I have it every day.
Let me ask you this, because I've heard this. Is it true, or could it be true, that some of these hives might have some THC qualities to them? Because we have some THC enthusiasts who probably listen to this podcast, but I've seen it on Facebook. I don't know if it was real. Like they were like pollinating where like marijuana grows wild, and they were like, people wanted that honey so bad. Is that something that could be real?
This is just an educated guess.
Okay.
Because I don't pollinate plants that have THC in them. So I don't know from firsthand on that, and I don't study it. But I don't believe you're going to find THC in the flowers of the plants, or at least the nectar. So if the bees are pulling nectar from that plant, because I know hemp flowers, okay, because I've had someone reach out to me. Do you remember when the hemp factory was going to come in?
Yeah,
I think it was in shallow water, and then it kind of got shut down. Well, they were trying to get a lot of local farmers to grow hemp, and I don't think it needed to be pollinated, but I think it could help. And so I had some guys reach out to me and asked about this kind of stuff. So I sort of looked into this. You can buy THC infused honey. Okay. Now that's different than just.
Would that be like a blueberry infused honey? You know what I mean? You can make it like flavored almost.
Yeah, it's kind of like a flavor. You basically inject, I think it's oil.
Oh, yeah.
You just inject the oil into it and you kind of mix it in. There's a way that there's a fusion process that kind of makes it mix with the honey. Now that's different. Like what the bees are bringing into the hive from that plant, I don't think it's going to have any level of THC in it at all. You'd have to infuse it. Now that's an educated guess.
Don't buy into the hype, people. That's all I gotta say. So, can you explain to us what pollination is? I'm trying to.
It's how flowers have sex.
And bees are
it's
essential in it.
Yeah.
Bees aren't the only ones that do that.
No,
But are they a big component of it?
they are one of the most useful, yes, and abundant. I shouldn't say abundant. The bees are very effective. Honeybees specifically are very effective at certain crops. Watermelon being one of them. They're one of the most effective. Sunflowers. Honeybees love sunflowers.
I got a family in Kansas. Shout out to them.
Yeah. So, but bumblebees will pollinate other things better than honeybees. Mason bees will pollinate some plants better than honeybees. The leafcutter bee is a native bee, I think in North Dakota or South Dakota, that they do better at alfalfa. It just depends. And then, of course, you got different varieties of butterflies and things that can do that as well. But honeybees are pretty universal, like almost anything crop related, even strawberries, and they're more versatile. Like where the bumblebee might be too big for certain plants, a honeybee is just.
Can you look up bumblebee? I want to
versatile.
look at a picture of it. What kind of bees do we have local here? Native that were like
native. I think
species.
bumblebees are native to America in general, so we do have those.
Look at the bumblebee.
It's pulled up the Transformers bumblebee.
So these ones are a little bit bigger. The bumblebee.
Oh, they're quite large. They're about as large as your thumb.
They look a little bit more fluffy.
Is it true that they're friendly? Like,
I wouldn't call them friendly.
really?
Have you ever gotten close to a beehive? The bumblebees,
no.
Like they're just as defensive as a honeybee.
Because I've seen videos where like people have them in their hand and they're like kind of petting them with their thumb.
Well, you can do the same thing with a honeybee.
Oh,
So there's no such thing as THC honey.
Well,
Based on an educated guess. I was thinking there was.
you can get it infused.
Yeah, I'm sure that's pretty good. That'll do the job. So the bumblebee is native to the Americas.
Mm-hmm.
What about the honey? That's another
Honeybee
one?
is not native.
Is it an African bee?
Well, they're really native to that continent around Europe. The European honeybee. There are also Asian honeybees, or our African honeybees, or Russian honeybees, but typically all of those came from one area and they've just spread and they've kind of localized themselves. But they are not native to America. Honeybees were never in America. They were brought here by settlers.
Do they have do you know this? Do they have one common ancestor they came from? Bees?
I don't think I could answer that with any real certainty. I'm assuming so, but it would be a guess.
Because how these dumbass dogs we own come from fucking wolves. These bees don't come from some crazy fucking super predator.
There's some that.
I love my dogs, by the way, so I just thought I'd say that.
The bees are pretty old. They've been around a long time. Most of them were solitary. They became a community more later on. They evolved into the hive-based system, where wasps did not.
Did humans have anything to do with their evolution?
I don't think so.
Like dogs, no, they're just super wild.
No, because humans, and we're talking. I guess it depends on the area. If you're looking at Israel, for example, there is archaeological evidence that humans kept bees in skiffs, basically wicker baskets, and buildings would actually have dedicated spots of these wicker baskets. But when they were ready to harvest honey, they'd kill the bees. So they were regrowing bees every year.
Okay.
And in Europe, it was like a practice to go bee hunting. And so you would literally go looking for beehives, and there are people who specialized in tracking them, and they would go find a hive, kill it, harvest the honey, and then they'd bring it to market.
Some tribal, people that are still existing in this world do that right now, don't they?
It's still very common in Cambodia.
Yeah, I've seen that.
They have their Asian, what are they called? It may just be called an Asian honeybee, but they're bigger. They're bigger than our normal honeybees, and their larva is a delicacy. Their larvae, they'll take the hive and they'll take the honey and then they'll melt down the wax, but then they'll even take the larva out and they sell the larva as a delicacy food. But so yeah. Mm-hmm.
What are some of the with the wax? What can you do with the wax?
There's a lot of things. Wax is more of a a strengthening foundation. So you can do candles. but honestly, it's kind of a waste because it takes so much. But we use it for like furniture polish, or if you need to polish your either your furniture, your kitchen table, or really like cutting boards, you can use it.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, it's just white mineral oil and beeswax, and it'll shine up your wood pretty well. And you've got lip balm.
Yeah, you sell lip balm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lip balm, and then you've got beard balm. If you wanted to like moisturize your beard, you can do that with beard balm. It's like a beard balm, but there's like people call it beard butter. There's beard balm, there's beard oil. But if you've got a beard, the texture of that, what gives it its texture is the beeswax. It's the other things that like the coconut oil and the shea butter. That's what's really moisturizing your beard. But when you're shaping it, the beeswax is what's keeping that shape and holding it there.
Could curl up my mustache with it.
Yeah, you can do that. And that's just some of the things. I mean, there's other things you can make, like cheesecloths. Like if you didn't want to use like that plastic wrap, you can take like a thin cloth and soak it in beeswax and some other stuff, and you can use it to preserve food. So beeswax actually has a ton of uses.
Is this what a lot of like Americans were doing before, like, United existed? They were utilizing a lot of this stuff
Possibly
in their homes.
I know that the Catholic Church, for a very long period of time, in more medieval times, like they were only allowed to use beeswax candles. You couldn't use any other kind of wax. So that right there alone made it a commodity, a huge commodity.
Yeah, it's a lot of money right there.
Yeah.
Dang. Well, you guys keep this conversation going. I got to pee real quick.
Okay.
So I'm going to take a break real quick.
Is it true that bees are close to becoming extinct?
Damn, I was going to ask that.
They're definitely hurting. There's a lot of... They're being protected because of the importance that we rely on them heavily for pollination. So if we didn't have them, much of the world would starve. Because of that, of the impact they have on humans, we are trying to protect them as best we can. But are they going to go extinct? That really depends on how our climate's going to turn out in the next 100 years, I'd say. I think they're okay right now. There's tons of beekeepers. It is harder to keep bees than it was 30 years ago. And I know that from reading books from the time periods, and you see almost the level of difficulty goes up as the years pass. There's a factor that we haven't really talked about much, and I'm kind of sad he won't be able to hear this, but the biggest component there's two main things that are really hurting bees. It's habitat loss, which we can see just out here with the cotton fields. And urban areas growing. Now, bees can still live in urban areas, but they're not treated very well in those urban areas. People are so scared of getting stung. But habitat loss is a big part of it. But there's something called a varroa mite, and it's essentially a tick for bees. Okay, and they spread a lot of diseases in the bees. And it's not just one in particular. There's a lot of different viruses that they spread to the bees, and the bees can spread it amongst themselves. The big one, there's something called deformed wing virus, and it makes it to where the bees literally can't fly. And so when they come out of the cell, their wings are deformed and they can never fly. And so at that point, they're somewhat useless to the hive. They are a huge problem all over the globe. There's only a few places in the world where they don't exist now. And the reason why they've spread everywhere is because beekeepers and the need for pollination have spread it to each other. And it's everywhere. And we have them here. Almost every single one of my hives have them, and I have to treat for them. I do.
When it comes to beekeepers, like you always hear that there's a shortage of anything when it comes to occupations. Is there such thing as a shortage of beekeepers? Like, could we have more beekeepers than what?
That's a good question, and I'm going to expand on it. there is a shortage of beekeepers in terms of the demand for food. So there are actually there's a lot of hobbyists like me, but there's about 80% of the national population of bees are actually owned by commercial operations. And these are, I don't want to make it sound like it's a corporate thing, but these are essentially, they're farmers. They're not even really farmers. They're the farmer type of guys that have just grown and grown and grown to this huge operation of just bees. And then they go out and they pollinate different areas of the country. So like, and usually it's in February, they'll put all their bees in the almond orchards in California. And then they'll move up to the apple orchards in Washington. And they'll come over to the Dakotas and do alfalfa. And then they'll come over to do blueberries in New Jersey area. Then they'll come south for the oranges in Florida. And then they usually rest in like Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas until the orchards or until the almonds are started up again. So these operations are huge. And they're $1 million operations. So to give you an idea, the almond orchards, really where the money is being made right now, if they're paying about $350 a hive for renting for just a few weeks while the almonds are blooming. And 80% of the hives in the country are going to almonds every February. The only ones that are not are typically hobbyists that aren't. But typically when the commercial guys are coming through a town, they'll make like a Craigslist post or something. Say, hey, I need 2 additional hives, or I need X amount of hives. Any hobbyists want to lend me a hive? I'm coming back through on this date. And so like they'll rent out the hives to the commercial guys because the commercial guys are making more in the almond orchards. And so they'll even do that if they're short. And there is not enough bees to fully pollinate the almond orchards. And that's with 80% of the entire population of bees in the country at the almond orchards in February. There's just not enough bees, which would have since also mean there's not enough beekeepers. And for those almond orchards to get their crop insurance, they have to have a minimum 2 hives per acre at minimum. And that's not even enough to pollinate. That's just to make sure they get their crop insurance in case it fails. So if you've got a situation where you've got multiple orchard owners that don't have enough bees, now you have a bidding war for beehives, and the price can even go higher than $350. So most of these guys have about 20,000 to 30,000 hives. So if you're renting each hive, you say you got 35, or say you got 30,000 hives, and you're renting each one for $350, you're dealing with multi-million-dollar operations. And then you've got theft on top of that. So because of the values of those hives, when you put them on that land, you have issues with the cartels coming up from Mexico and stealing them, or just local population people stealing them and then re-renting them to people who need it. And so theft is also a big issue for that. So I'm getting I'm rambling now at this point, but I think the bee populations.
There's a dark side to everything.
There's cartel dealing with bees.
There's a fucking dark side to everything.
There's money. There's money, right?
Yeah. There's millions of dollars of honey. I mean, millions of dollars of bees in general, but bees are definitely hurting with a lot of different environmental factors.
And do bees essentially suffer because of that at all?
Yes.
Yes.
The traveling to get them there and to take them out, and even the diseases they're catching from the other bees in the area that are not from like their area, because you might have bees from North Dakota intermixing with bees from Texas, okay?
Yeah.
And they're sharing each other's diseases. They're experiencing losses of about 40 to 60% throughout the course of the year because of this. But then they split those hives come spring, and one hive becomes 2 every single year pretty much if you've kept them healthy. And so you replenish those numbers. So they seem high, but the more the environmental factors start to affect us, the harder that becomes to do, or the harder that is to do. So we're almost walking a tightrope.
Is there anything you and I, us, people who don't really own bees, can do to help maybe make them stronger, protect them a little bit more? Or does this become like a legislation, type deal?
Oh.
Or all of it?
Well, legislation is tried, and we can go into that too. I just don't know how much time we have, but
we have as much time as you want. Because
okay. I didn't know how long
I'm fully invested. We can go until these cameras die.
All right, so the legislation side, I'll try to attack that first. Okay, let's go to you. How do you help? I get this question from local people all the time, so let's keep it local. The main issue we have out here is water. We don't get enough of it. And if you've got a bird bath in your backyard, keep it filled. The bees, you may not see bees on it when you go outside, but you'd be surprised that you probably do have bees visiting it quite frequently. And it may just be one or two, but over time, if they learn to rely on that as a water source, you'll start seeing 12, 30, 40 bees just in one sitting because they know they can find water there whenever they need it. And then if you've got multiple hives pulling from it, well, then you've got even more. And they don't compete over it. I mean, they're working together and they're drinking it. But I have a pretty big dog bowl I keep out in my backyard, and I've got multiple water sources. I got a bird feeder. I've got a dog bowl that I kind of put some bricks and rocks into where they can land on it, and then I've got like a 5-gallon chicken water feeder that I keep loaded all the time. And I have to refill the dog bowl every single day and the bird bath every single day.
Wow.
Now, I've got 10 hives in the backyard, so it's a lot of hives pulling from it. And I've got that 5-gallon bucket. That 5-gallon one will last about 2 weeks, okay? But the dog bowl and the bird bath are gone every single day, and I have to refill it. Now, I'm dealing with evaporation, but a lot of it the bees are taking too. So if you've got some kind of thing in your backyard where you can keep water filled and keep it filled consistently to where they can continue to visit it, that actually has a bigger impact than you may realize. Now, if you want to go a little step further, you can actually buy dry pollen feed. I don't always recommend it because it's not cheap. Like a 40-pound bag is going to cost you about $80 to $100, but it will last you a year or longer. Okay, and then you can just put it out there in a cup. Like, they don't care. You can just literally put it in a cup and put it in the backyard. And once the bees find it, they'll go back home and tell all the other bees about it. And they'll come visit, and it'll be gone in a few days. They'll take all of it. That during the early spring is crucial because bees, when they come out of winter, there's not a whole lot of food, and they've consumed most of their food throughout the winter to make it through. So the first thing that usually pops up in our area is the Bradford pear trees. That's the trees that put out the white flowers that you always see.
Believe me, I clean up that stuff. I'm a landscaper.
So that's usually their first food source. And then it's gone in a week. Like it doesn't last long. And then there's nothing. There's really nothing until about April. So that the Bradfords usually bloom. They bloomed late this year. They bloomed about March, but usually they bloom in February. So there's about a month and a half period where they don't have food, and they're the hardest months aren't typically the early winter months. It's the late winter months after they've consumed all their food stores, and there's not a whole lot to gather from, and so hives can struggle or even starve. So if we usually the last big snowstorm or ice storm we get at the end of the year, or excuse me, at the end of the winter, that's usually where you start seeing hives die because they have no food. And those hives, I'm rambling again, but those hives, they generate heat by vibrating their wing muscles. And they have to consume a lot amount of carbohydrates to maintain that energy level to keep that hive thermoregulated during the winter. So if they run out of food, they can't maintain the heat anymore. And they can literally starve from trying to keep the hive heated. So having the pollen out for them can help them. But again, that's an investment. And you almost have to want to do that. But otherwise, water should be fine. Now, that's what you can do here locally. Now, in terms of legislation, it's a double-edged sword. And what's interesting is almost every single president has done something one way or another that they thought would be impactful and helpful. So usually when the legislation favors the bees, it severely hurts the farmers. Yeah. And then when you legislate towards the farmers, it severely hurts the bees. You can rarely find middle ground that helps. And usually when the politicians just shut up and let the farmers and the beekeepers work it out together collectively, that's usually when you get the best solutions. Otherwise, the government typically makes it worse. And the exceptions to that would be the use of neonicotinoid pesticides. They've been banned in Europe. neonicotinoids is actually a very good pesticide for farmers, and it's cheap typically. And it kills things that, like out here, it'll kill like boll weevils, and that's what destroys cotton crop. But unfortunately, neonicotinoids are devastating to bees. They can bring it back to the hive, and you can have a whole dead out just from neonicotinoids. It's awful stuff for bees. But if the farmers aren't allowed to use it, they have to find alternative ways to deal with their pests, and it's usually more expensive. And farmers are already struggling to keep, their head above water. They really struggle with it. So I think it was when Obama came into office, he regulated it, and the farmers really suffered, but the bee populations recovered. But when then Trump came in, he deregulated it, and the farmers did really well, and the bees populations.
I was going to ask you, is there sort of a left and right favor one over the other kind of?
It really just depends on who's green and who's for the farmers. And it's hard to be both.
You can't be both?
It's hard. There really isn't a line.
Is that sort of like with the oil field?
I don't know. I don't
know what I mean? Like, you want green, obviously, but oil's kind of like the one thing we need now.
I guess it could be used in that scenario too. There's not a right answer. And the best answer that is usually when the farmers and the beekeepers are talking, especially during the commercial operations when they're bringing in thousands of hives. So like in the almond orchards, I know beekeepers, they hate the almond orchards because they have to spray when the flowers are out. And when the bees are on the flowers, they're getting sprayed with pesticides. And that's one of the reasons they have huge losses. Well, the farmers know that. And that's one of the reasons why the rental prices on the hive are so high, because they know they're likely killing the majority of those hives that are out there. They're getting sprayed. But if they don't do that, that nectar is also attracting pests that's detrimental to those trees. So if they don't do it, they could lose their entire crop. So it's a tightrope. Now, that doesn't happen with all crop. Like right now, I'm doing pollination with Caprock Berry Farms, and they mainly do strawberries. And the guy who owns that land, that owns those strawberries, actually sells pesticides to farmers. And so he knows what pesticides to use and what not to use. And then he'll tell me, he's like, hey, I have to do this for worms. Okay, there might be a worm. And he's like, what I'm having to use to do this is going to hurt your bees. And so I'll do one of two things. Depending on what kind of the pesticide is, I'll just go up to the hive early in the morning before they've left, and I'll just put hardware cloth over the entrance to where they can't get out that day. We'll get 24 hours go off, and then I'll release them the next day, and then they're good.
Cat fight.
But he will tell me when he has to do certain things so I can prepare. Sometimes I have to take the hive out of the area because there's been occasions in the past where a cotton farmer was going to have to spray his entire property, even though we weren't going to be pollinating that area. The fact that my bees were in the vicinity and might be visiting those plants made it an issue, and I still had to do the same thing. So, like I said, when they're working together, you can find workarounds. When legislation gets involved, one party gets hurt over the other. And so collaboration is a big thing. And sometimes even with collaboration, there's no way to work around it. Like the almond orchards, there's really no right answer.
Are pesticides essential? Like, do we need those?
Yeah.
In order to survive?
To maintain the food source for the population of our size, they're essential, I would have to say. And that's coming from a beekeeper. Yes.
Have bees grown resistant to pests? No, they're not like other things.
They are trying. There is an effort right now, and I learned this recently from a podcast from the Honeybee Lab in Florida.
This is a podcast, the Honeybee Lab?
It's called? No. It's called Two Bees in a Podcast.
It's like Two Bears, One Cave. I wanted to tell you that earlier.
That's pretty cool.
So the guy who runs the podcast is the university professor and runs the Honeybee Lab in Florida, and it's based in that laboratory. So it's actually, they're focused more on research than actual like hobby beekeeping. They're focused on their research behind the things. So they just recently interviewed somebody or a group of people who is trying to develop a food that the bees can consume that has medicine in it that could potentially make them more resilient to certain types of pesticides.
Okay.
They're not in a position where they can commercialize that, but it is being studied, and they're making progress from what I understand. But it's not. We're not at the point where we can do that yet. But be resistant to that. But yeah.
Have you heard of like using little bitty like insect like size like drones to pollinate things? Have you heard of that?
Yes, I know that Walmart has a patent for one right now, and they've had
is
one
that a
for
good
over
thing?
10 years. I think it might be the only option in the future.
And because bees will be gone in the future? I wasn't here for that part of the.
That's a difficult question to answer. I think it has more to do with the amount of food
Oh, yeah.
to feed the world. There's not enough bees to meet the demand for food. I do think there's a lot of bees and there's a lot of beekeepers. I think it would be very hard for bees to go extinct, just because of the amount of effort going into them and the research going into them and how well people take care of them. It's more of an issue of feeding the amount of mouths that are in the world. That's the
As we
bigger issue.
continue to grow.
Yes. And then that's when the drone bees, I think, will become rather essential and in effect, maybe even more effective over time. Not immediately, but over time, they actually might be better.
Do you think that if those drone bees are more effective, it might even be beneficial for real bees? Because they kind of can eliminate people. Like, they don't have to be used to pollinate, or are bees going to pollinate no matter what?
They're going to pollinate. No matter
Oh,
what.
okay.
I mean,
That's
you're
just
still
what they
gonna have
do?
Beekeepers, you're still going to have beekeepers, and the drone bees can't make honey.
That's true.
So they're only going to be used for pollination. And I do believe we will have them at some point, and I do think that they're going to benefit the world. I'm actually for it, not against it. I know places like China has to have them.
Why would people be against it?
There's always people that are against something.
Everything.
So, I mean,
huh?
you've got vax versus anti-vax. You've got flat earthers versus round earth. Like, it's just there's always
Okay,
gonna be someone
well,
upset.
the flat Earth thing is like, what the hell? Come
know.
on, that's the one thing where I'm like, really? That's what you believe in? I can agree with a lot of other things, like people's
Well,
different opinions.
I know that in China, and it's so weird because most of the world's honey, which is fake, is coming out of China. Most of China is actually having to hand pollinate their crops. They literally have like pollination brushes, and they get up on ladders and they brush a flower and they brush a flower and they brush a flower. And
Isn't that demand to do it?
it's very labor intensive. And I mean, there's so much mistrust with China in general. Like, they can't even get beekeepers to come in. So like, they're only having to rely on their own beekeepers, and there's just not a whole lot of bees there. Not honeybees anyway. And so they for the amount of people that live there, there's not enough bees to pollinate to feed the population. And that's the issue we run into ultimately, I think, there. But if we were to lose bees, I think it would be more based off environmental conditions. Like if the earth continues to warm and crops become more difficult, or just their food source becomes less and less abundant, that's the bigger
They're
issue.
predicting the West to be very, very, like a severe drought.
Well, we're
Very
already
soon,
in it.
even worse. They're predicting the West to get even way worse, like California in that region.
Well, I know Vegas and Lake Mead, pretty much Lake Mead's almost all gone at this point. I'm not sure what Vegas.
Have you
is gonna
seen that Lake Mead it's gone? It's disappearing, and all these bodies are showing up. Have you seen that?
do. Yeah, I have.
That's crazy. Have you seen that? The mob threw all those people in that lake, and now that lake is gone. So you're seeing all those bodies show up. It's crazy.
Yeah, I have seen some of those. But yes, I don't think we're in trouble losing bees anytime soon. Beekeepers are doing a really good job of fighting against the diseases that they're facing and some of the shortages that are there. Eventually, crops like what the almond orchards in California, if they don't solve their water problem, those orchards are going to dry up. And
Well, don't almonds use a lot of water anyways?
they do. Well, California in general, not just almonds, but they produce a ton of produce. And that whole valley area is drying up, and there's not any real replacement. So they're already talking about starting to do almond orchards in Idaho, moving up there. So it's just, the more that area dries up, the more food prices are going to go up. But they still need bees.
I had even heard that what hurt California a lot was when they were when I don't know if they probably still do, but growing avocados demand a lot of water, and they soak up pretty much all the water that's in the ground. So back in the day when they were producing them, there was such a high demand, and they were just growing them where it just pretty much just dried up like all the water that was in that land.
I mean, the Colorado River doesn't even reach the ocean anymore.
Yeah,
it's getting completely used before it even reaches the ocean. That's wild to me. And I think it's been over a decade since it actually has reached the ocean. Yeah, we're getting some pretty heavy stuff here, but
are you all right with that? Because I like talking about this stuff. People need to hear it.
Oh, we usually go deeper.
Yeah, I'm trying to hold back on getting into like, government stuff. Some could say this is all planned out to eliminate the small guys.
I think the whole just bee education is, I'm like, my mind is so blown, and I'm leaving this podcast with like an empathy for like bees, if that makes sense, or just like a respect for like these tiny little things working so hard for such a short life,
for 40 days,
like their life
at the most.
well, that's during the spring and
Right,
the summer.
yeah, okay.
The winter they can live longer, but that's pretty much
Like I just, wow.
That's crazy. Huh? I kind of want to get back into that. Like, how is a queen made? Do they make, like, does a hive make a queen?
Is it born or like?
Well, I mean, you have to have a queen to really have another queen. So the queen is laying about 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day, and people think that the queen runs the hive, and that's not true. The queen pheromone keeps the hive together, so she does have a very important role in that. But usually the hive collectively, the workers, make the decisions. Like, they're the ones that decide when to swarm. They're the ones that typically decide when it's time to replace their queen, because their queen the queen's fascinating. I hope it doesn't sound too gross, but the queen can choose the gender of her offspring by whether she puts a sperm in the egg or not. She can control the sperm into each egg. If she doesn't put a sperm in an egg, it grows up to be a male drone. If she fertilizes the egg, it grows up to be a female worker. Now, over time, that queen has a limited supply of sperm. She only mates once, in her life. So she has a limited sperm count. Once she starts to run out, or if her eggs are less productive, the hive as a collective can sense that, and they know they need to replace her. So they'll grow, and they'll basically take one of her eggs and they will feed it royal jelly. Now, all early larvae, like from an egg, when they're an egg originally, and after 3 days they hatch. And then they're a small larva, like we're talking small. That's when they start feeding it royal jelly. And most workers, they'll get royal jelly to a certain point, and then they cut them off. And so that's the ones that turn into a worker. But if they continue to feed royal jelly to that larva, it will eventually grow into a queen, and they'll elongate the comb to accompany her larger size, and then they'll cap it off, and then after a certain amount of time, she'll hatch, and it's a brand new queen. It's a virgin queen, and there can only be one queen, and it's Highlander time. Like there can only be one, and they'll duel. Like she'll duel the
Have
old
you seen
queen. I've gotten close. I can kind of come back to that later, but the younger queen usually, I'd say 95% of the time, the younger queen just takes the old one out.
Right.
Now, I don't know which comes first. She either goes and mates first and then comes back and kills the old queen, or she kills the old queen immediately. I don't know which happens first, but when the virgin queen, she'll fly off and then she'll go mate with a drone somewhere in the treetops, and she'll mate with more than one typically. And when the drone mates, it dies. Like
Whoa.
It's like the stinger. When that penis goes in, it doesn't come out. Like the bee, it just falls dead immediately. After.
And she'll have multiple partners?
I believe so, yes.
Man, shit.
She
I've
take
never
her
seen-
souls.
Shout out to the women, man.
Now, she'll come back, and she's got that sperm that she can control at that point, and then the cycle continues. That's how you constantly, like, essentially, if the rotation of queens never has an issue, technically a colony can be immortal. Now that doesn't usually happen because they get diseases. There's other factors that can take out colonies. But essentially, if they're kept healthy, they're immortal in a lot of ways. Yeah, because they can replace. And then you have swarming. They come in if they run out of space. The workers will literally protect the new queen from the old queen coming to kill her. And so that's why they can swarm. So there's all sorts of reasons why.
So what is royal jelly? What is it?
It's a food source. We can consume it, but we don't because it's hard to get a hold of. But they secrete it from their head. It's just a different kind of food source or different kind of fat. And I really don't know much about it, to be honest, because it's not really helpful towards the beekeeping that I do. So it's not an area that I really have to worry about. Usually what I do, the way I get my bees is I'll go do a removal and I'll take that removal, put it in a hive, and I always replace the queen. I'll take that old queen, I'll put her in a cage, and then I'll have ordered another queen from a queen breeder somewhere else in the country that it's got proven genetics that I know they're not going to be Africanized, they're not going to be aggressive. And I'll bring them in and I'll introduce that new queen to that hive. And so that way I know they're always genetically safe. Because what makes a hive Africanized or overly aggressive has to deal with the genetics of the queen and who she's mated with. Because she herself may not be Africanized or aggressive in tendencies, but the drone that she mates with might be. And so then when she comes back and starts laying eggs, she might be laying eggs of an aggressive breed or gene pool. And then you're dealing with an aggressive hive that can be dangerous. So I do a lot of queen manipulation just to keep my hive safe from my neighbors, my kids, and all that kind of stuff, and myself. I've dealt with some pretty bad stuff before.
Is beehive removal, is that your primary job?
It is this time of the year typically. I make pretty good money from that. But I am a licensed insurance agent. I help people with their life insurance, retirement accounts, that kind of stuff. And I do other stuff too. I've done some substitute teaching, odd jobs as well, especially during when COVID was going on. There was a lot of issues. The job I had at the time just completely dissolved because of COVID. And so beekeeping actually was a hobby. And then during COVID and when that was going on, it became an income source, a source. And so I started focusing more on that. But like for a removal, I charge $400 for the first.
Yeah, your price is up there right there.
Yeah. So I charge $400 for the first hour. And essentially that's the cost of the box to put them in. Like a box will cost me $200 from Sutherland's or Tractor Supply. And then that hive will typically towards cotton flow season expand into a second box. So essentially that $400 is buying the boxes I need to house them. And then every hour after that, it's $100. And so typically a removal will take 2 to 3 hours on average. So it'll range between $500 and $600 total by the end of it.
Can you explain to us the process of a removal?
I can.
We got time. Let's hear it. Because that's how we heard of you. Mike G, shout out to you. You removed from Mike G a little thing that came in his backyard, I guess.
Yeah. So it depends on the kind of removal. So there are swarm removals and then there's hive removals. Swarm removal is what I did for Mike. They're simple. And we don't charge for those because those hives are going to leave anyway. They're not going to be there very long. We're basically coming to pick up freebies in a sense. And it's not labor intensive. Like essentially I put a bucket under him and I shake him and then click the lid on it. And that's pretty much it. Swarms are simple. Hive removals are very labor intensive though, because you're having to usually cut into a wall or crawl under a building, or you're having to be 2 stories up on a ladder.
So like with the watermelon issue, that was a hive underneath the warehouse thingy or underneath the shed? Remember you said that was a hive?
That was a hive. I didn't do that removal. That was somebody else. That was before I was into beekeeping. But yeah, they had to cut the bottom of the shed floor, and then they had to lift up the flooring, and the hive was just littered on the bottom half of the flooring. And then what you do in that scenario is you've got not really a knife, but we have a hive tool. And it's what we use when we're working in the hives. And you scrape it off. You scrape off the wax. You take the wax and then you rubber band them to the frames of the box. So those frames are movable, right? They're about this big. And so you take that wax, you put it inside the frame, and then use rubber bands to hold them there. And then eventually the bees will glue it, or they'll put more wax and solidify it onto the frame for you. And they'll literally chew the rubber band, and the rubber band will just pop. And, and then they just discard out the front for you. So that's where we put it. And so all their honey, all their pollen, their brood, everything, we're essentially making it a mobile home. We're taking the wax off and put it in a new place. And usually I use something called a bee vac or a bee vacuum, and I'll plug it in and I'll suck up. If there's just a ton of bees and they're being kind of problematic during the removal, I'll suck them up. I'll just start sucking them up in the vacuum, and that allows me to work on the wax. And I'm looking for the queen the entire time. And we have this clip called a queen catcher, and we just grab her, and it's got slits in it. Okay. And the slits are big enough that the worker bees can crawl in to feed her or take care of her, but she's too fat to get out of them. So it allows workers to come in, but she can't get out. And then typically you'll take that clip once you've got her in your rubber band her to the frame, and then all the bees just march in because that's where they smell her. And there's a few videos probably up.
We're watching one right now. Can you turn on the volume for us, please? Is that the vacuum?
Well, that's not me. That's somebody else.
Oh, you have a video of you doing it.
Yeah. I've got, if you just search.
So these little, like, as you see right here, like those are, you pull that out and there's a whole.
Well, this is an actual bee vacuum. That's a do-it-yourself bee vacuum. Mine's a little bit different. I custom made mine to be lighter and mobile. And mine's just basically a 5-gallon bucket with a bucket head shop vac clipped on the top. And then the way I control the suction is I actually put a honey valve, like a honey spigot on the end, and I can close or shut it to control the suction. Because if you're sucking the bees too hard, they'll hit that back wall and die.
Okay.
But you got to find the right speed to where they go in, but when they hit, they just go down and they start crawling around.
Is it on your Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, Tumbleweed Bees is my YouTube channel as well, but I don't monetize it. It's just really what I do to record and save things so my kids can watch it when I'm done, and then I'll edit it to shorten it down for their attention spans.
Do your kids like this stuff?
Oh, they're fascinated. They've had me go talk to their school and stuff like that.
Oh man, dude, I love this stuff. This is cool.
Yeah, see, you can see the pollens on their pollen sacs here.
Is that yellow stuff?
Yeah, that's the yellow stuff. They're carrying pollen there.
Oh shit.
That's one of my earlier videos. That was like the first year I was doing this. Anyway, did I answer your question though about not the removal? So it's just a process of making sure you're vacuuming up the bees, taking all the wax off, and put them in the frames. And if you get the queen, they just march right in.
Yeah, so I speak the truth on this podcast. I was looking at it's like $400 is a lot of money, but now that you're saying you kind of have to do a lot of labor stuff.
It's more labor intensive than people think.
Yeah.
And here's what usually happens. So like we'll see when people find out my price, the first thing they do is they start looking somewhere else. And one of two things happen. They either come back because they can't find anyone else to do it, or they don't call me back because they did find someone to do it. But what ends up happening is that the harder the job is, the less beekeepers want to do it. So if it's high up in a tree, if it's behind a brick wall, if it's under a house where you have to go through a crawl space, a lot of beekeepers that do removals for free are only doing the easy ones because they don't want to do the hard ones because they know how hard it is to do. So if the hive's aggressive and shows Africanized tendencies, they won't even touch it. I don't care. If you're hiring me to remove bees, I'm going to remove them regardless. But that is my fee, and I'm upfront about it. And I'm not the most expensive in town either. You go to Dallas, you're paying over $1,000 easy.
Damn.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I would assume. I mean, because you're putting yourself in danger. Yeah. I think $450 is pretty cheap.
So for someone like us, how would we know some hive is Africanized? What are some signs we can see?
Well, you don't know for sure unless you send it off for genetic testing.
Oh,
we just basically
or aggressively.
It's just how aggressive are they?
Okay.
And so we kind of, us beekeepers, we almost use hot wings as a sense. So like you got mild, medium, hot, and then they're trying to kill you kind of thing. And I've dealt with 2 hives in the last 3 years that have been very rough. And I've had a third that actually became rough they replaced their queen, and whoever she mated with made that whole hive mean. But I was working out, doing a removal in Woodrow, and it was on right off of I-27. And the house was being sold, and they were going to bulldoze some of the older buildings in the back. And I cut into it. In fact, I may have that video. It's not this one. That was in Lorenzo. But there's another one that I've got up there. It's only about 2 minutes long, but you can see them just attacking my face.
I think that's the one we just watched.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was a pretty mean hive. And then the one that became aggressive was out in the strawberry fields about 2 years ago. And I opened them up, and they immediately attacked my face.
It was
He was
this
like
one, right?
Yeah, this was a pretty mean hive. I got stung about 16 times on this one.
So these suits, I mean, it doesn't fully protect you, right? Is there such thing as a suit that can...
Speaking of bees,
No, it's like a bug.
she don't like bugs.
But is there like a suit that full on protects you? Or
Yeah, but the more protection that it is, the hotter it's going to be.
I bet.
It won't breathe. So dealing with the heat is another issue.
So in that suit, is there a spot you're vulnerable?
Oh, yeah.
Where is it?
Wherever it's not baggy. So like these suits are baggy for a reason.
Oh, okay.
Because like if
So
they
like
do,
right here?
yeah, like I get stung on the wrist quite a bit.
Yeah.
I've been hit under the arm, and when sometimes I'll be at a removal where it's just comfortable to sit down and just work them right here. And if I'm sitting down, the top of your legs are not baggy, and so they'll sting you on your thighs. And oftentimes they're just crawling on your thighs, and then you lean forward, and you kind of put your forearm on it, and you squish them, and then they stick you when you squish them. So a lot.
So technically, that's just a boiler suit, right?
It's a painter suit, essentially. It's a glorified painter suit.
Okay.
But most of the time when they're trying to attack you, they're not actually trying to sting your suit. They're trying to sting your face. So this veil is right here, and most of them are trying to hit you here, and they can't reach you unless you lean and your veil kind of clips your nose, and you get hit on the nose sometimes.
So for neck protection, is there a way? Is there any like vulnerable spots right here?
Not on my suit. Mine completely zips around, and where it meets here, where the two zippers meet, there's Velcro that goes over that flap and Velcro's down, so they can't get through that. I have had bees inside my veil, which is very disturbing. But it was an interesting. I didn't get stung, thankfully. I learned a very cheap lesson that day. I forgot to zip up one of the zippers, and they crawled in, but it was early in the morning is when I was dropping them off for pollination, and it was about 55 degrees. And so they were coming out because sun was coming up, and they were starting to come out, and they were just curious, but it was cold. And so they were using my body heat to warm up. So they were crawling on my face, not to sting. They were trying to keep warm.
Dang. Now, I will sign a full liability release form if you let me. Can I come out there and do this with you?
I used to do that, and I stopped.
He said no.
No, you can tell me no.
The main reason is just
it would spook the bees.
No, I've had a reporter out there in a bee suit, and she did that interview just fine. It's a convenience of time. Like I don't have a set schedule when I do those inspections. I just do them when I think it needs to be done. And when I have to schedule someone to come out there, you're having to wait on them. You're having to some of these things, you can encounter problems that you have to fix. Anytime I go out to my bee yard, I'm always having to fix a problem. And sometimes it's helpful to have a person out there. Sometimes it's a hindrance to have a person out there when you need to fix a problem. And I tried to do mentoring in the past for people, and it just didn't turn out well because they're like, hey, I can't make it today. And I'm like, well, I waited on you. I could have did this yesterday, and now you're canceling on me. And so it just became a huge inconvenience. And so
thanks a lot, people.
I'll say this. The only time I've had a few people, the only time I will consider it is if there's a financial incentive behind it. That's the only time I'll do those now.
Subscribe to the Patreon so we can do it. Please, people. Now, you told me you did that. You went out with for the tech podcast. Mm-hmm. Did they get stung?
No,
they didn't.
But one of them got close. So we went out there. It was the Fearless podcast.
Shout out to them.
Yeah. Taylor Peters was the one that got in touch with me, and she's on staff there in the administration building, and she's working in the communications department, and she produces this, and she's got a camera guy that goes out with her. And I had an extra suit. I put her in the suit. And before we opened up the hive, I was just telling her, like, listen, these are nice bees. These aren't going to be mean. They're going to be more focused on feeding and just taking care of their young. And I was telling them, like, now, these bees, and as the longer you beekeep, you know your hives. You just know your hives. It's like if you see them kind of darting in front of your face, but not landing on you, they're seeing you as a potential threat, and they're telling you to back off. And if you don't, they'll literally headbutt you in the forehead or around the face area. They'll come in, they'll go boom, and they'll back off, and then boom, and then back off. It's like if you get headbutted, you need to get away. And the film guy actually got headbutted twice, and he had to back off.
So they'll fire off some warning?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of how you can tell you got a general hive. Like if you're getting headbutted before you're getting stung, that's a nice warning to have rather than a sting. And he was about 15 yards from the hive, so he wasn't even that close. I mean, it was about from here to the back half of that white car back there, and he got headbutted twice. And so, but we had that meeting beforehand, and he knew what to do, and he backed off, and he didn't get stung. And then what we took one of the frames out, and I'm letting Taylor kind of look at him, and she was recording the sound of the hive too. And the bees on the frame, most of those are nurse bees. They're not guard bees. And so when I found the queen, the nurse bees are who feed the queen. So I actually was able to take the frame, and I took it over to the film guy who's not wearing a suit, and was like, and I'm letting him take close-up pictures. And I didn't fear him getting stung because I knew that most of those were going to be nurse bees and the queen bee, and they weren't going to mess with him. So he was able to get like really close. He was able to touch it, and it just depends on. There's a level of touch.
Will the queen bee sting?
It can, but it usually won't.
It won't.
Will
it kill it?
She
if it
knows,
does?
right?
Will it kill it?
I don't think so. I think her barb is not an actual barb. I think it's more of a spear. It's not a barbed hook. Now, I don't know for sure. I've never been stung by queen bee, and I've never seen a queen bee actually sting anybody. They're very easy to mark because you can literally pick them up by the wings, and she still doesn't sting.
Oh, okay.
Whereas the worker bee will try to sting you if you try to pick it up. You can literally pick up a queen and not get stung, even though she has a stinger. She uses her stinger for dueling other queens. That's what it's.
I want to see that. That's wild to me. That would be cool to see. I wouldn't make it happen, but if it happened, I'd be like, fuck, I want to see that. That'd be cool.
Well, let me tell you a story. This is probably the worst situation I've ever been in. And I think your listeners will probably just enjoy hearing this.
Can you pause that while he tells the story?
Yes.
So it was my first year doing pollination. And what kind of got me into pollination is there's a lot of smaller farmers out here. And I'm not talking about cotton farm operations. I'm talking about like they might have an acre or two of strawberries or watermelons. And these are small scale guys who are selling at farmers markets. They can't afford to get a commercial beekeeper to come in. So what they do is they just rely on the local bee population to pollinate their crops because most commercial guys won't even put bees on their property unless they're ordering 10 hives or more. Well, that's too many bees for that much land, and it's too expensive for their profit that they're going to yield in that small amount of land. So that's kind of where I started getting into pollination is I just wanted to have the experience of pollination, see what it was about at first, and then it kind of became an income source. But I provide pollination services to the guys on a small scale. Like they may only rent 1 or 2 hives, and that's it.
Sort of like if you like a pumpkin patch here. Like I know there's some people do that. Would you like something like that, an operation like that?
Yeah, I mean, but now what's going on in Florida is different. That's large scale pollination.
Oh,
like those guys, that's much bigger. But like if they just have, I mean, we even have master gardeners that will rent a hive for a month or two, and so they need the pollination, but they can't work with a commercial guy because it's not feasible for them. So that's kind of where I fit in that market area. So it was my first year, and I put 2 hives on the strawberry field, and it was just north of Idledew. And so I'm out, I say just north. It was about 8 miles north of Idledew in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's so in the middle of nowhere of this area. There's deer out there. You can see deer in the road. And so about a month went by, and so we're kind of coming to the end of our contract, and this hive became aggressive. to the point where I'm going out there with sugar water. I'm just trying to give them some feed. And the reason why is the food source, we're going into what we call a dearth. And a dearth is basically a nectar drought. So there is strawberries, but just like, I mean, you're not going to eat one source of food every day. They need an abundance of food diversity to be healthy. So I'm putting some sugar water out there and some dry pollen feed. And I open them up and I'm starting to pour, and they just start attacking my arm and my face. I mean, it's just, they're coming straight off the comb and hitting me. No warning, just boom. And I'm like, man, what's going on? And I'm pouring this huge gallon of sugar water in the feeder inside their hive, and I'm getting stung on the wrist while I'm pouring it. And it hurts, but you can't like stop, and it's going to splatter over the hive. So I'm having to still pour. When I finish, I didn't even check. I was like, I just put the lid back on. I start going back to my truck. And at this point, they're fuming mad. Like, you can smell the alarm pheromone in the air. And at this point, I've already been stung 12 to 16 times, somewhere in that frame. And I'm at the point where there's so many on my body, I'm having trouble seeing the white on my suit.
Oh, shit.
And I can't get in my truck because I know they're all over my back. And I can't see them. So if I sit and I lean back in my truck, they're going to be stinging me through my suit on my back. So I try to walk it off. And I walk the full length of a spigot on a cotton field. Now, I'm not talking about just one length of the cotton field. I'm talking about the entire circle of the spigot. And they were still on me after walking that entire length. Like, full load. All of them were on me. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm still getting stung occasionally through my suit where it's not baggy. And I can feel all of a sudden a change in my body. I felt my heart kind of pump, and you could feel the adrenaline kick in. I felt my adrenaline kick in. I had been stung so many times. And then it hit me. It's like, oh my gosh, nobody knows that I'm going through this out here. I'm in the middle. I have no cell reception. The farmer's not out here. I'm out here by myself.
Did it kind of hit you? Did you kind of have a moment of like, this is happening? Like, this might happen?
Well, I was trying to think to myself, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that I'm not going to get in serious trouble here? Because if they have found, like, the weakest part of the suit is actually the legs, where the suit, it's basically just elastic that kind of wraps around your boot at the bottom. But there's enough room for them to crawl through that if it's any part of it is loose. So, but most of the time they're up high. They're around where you're breathing. And so luckily, even though that's the weak point, it's not as dangerous. But there's so many on me, the volume of bees that are on me. Like, I'm having trouble seeing through my veil.
Oh,
like,
damn.
I'm having to, like,
Shit.
and they're constantly crawling, so you're having to, like, view it in weird ways. And as I'm walking, like, you just get hit. And at this point, I'm getting hit so much, the adrenaline's kicked in. The stings aren't hurting as bad because the adrenaline's kicked in. But I realize that because that's kicked in, if I continue to take these stings in a larger volume, I'm going to be in trouble. And so I was like, okay, I just got to get in my truck regardless, roll the windows down and take off and let them blow out the side of the windows. And so I'm walking back, and thankfully, before I got my truck, I got this bee brush, and I'm just brushing bees off. Of course, they're coming back on me as soon as I brush them off, but I'm just trying to get as many off my back as possible. And I got in my truck, and of course I'm taking stings. I roll down the window, and bees just respond different indoors. It's like it's almost like they're claustrophobic and they try to get out. So as soon as I got in the truck, they're on the windows. They're trying to pop their way out, and I got out of there thankfully. But it was wild. It was wild. It's probably the most aggressive situation I've ever been in. And if I'm ever out far in the country like that again, if I'm like the removal in Morton I did to get this honey, the owner of the home stayed out there with me, but he just stayed in his truck. And I was so thankful that he was willing to do that, because you never know when those situations occur, even with a gentle hive. It just takes a few bees to set up that alarm pheromone. And that's one of the reasons we didn't even talk about this. One of the reasons why we use a smoker.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So we use a smoker to permeate the air with a different smell, and it can mask that alarm pheromone. So if a bee sets that alarm pheromone, but there's smoke in the air, they're confused.
So it doesn't stun them.
It's not a sting, or it's not sting related, and it's really just a
Does
mask.
it almost like slow them down a little bit so they don't find their source?
There's
like a
two
blocker.
things that it does really. It masks the communication of pheromones, so the bees can't communicate very easily when the smoke is in the air. But it also has this effect that makes them think that their hive's about to be on fire or already is on fire. And what they'll often do is they'll gorge themselves on honey in the chance that they may have to leave. So they're gorging themselves with honey in the expectation. It's almost like you're picking up your essentials. If your home's on fire, you're going to pick the things up that are most important to you. So they're grabbing their food and they're getting ready to leave if it actually catches fire. So it does those two things: the masking of the smells of the pheromones, and it also to potentially take their focus off of me, grab their honey in case they leave. And it also makes them kind of lethargic when they gorge themselves with honey, almost like how we eat too much food, they can become lethargic. And they get so fat with it, sometimes it's hard for them to sting because they can't bend it. They can't bend their abdomen as far. So the smoker can do a lot of things. It's a very important tool, but most of the time at my hives, the way I control my queens and their genetics, I oftentimes don't even have to smoke because they're that calm. But if I'm doing a removal, it's mandatory. The feral hives, you don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know. You need it to protect yourself in a lot of ways.
So like with that situation that you're in with like
Real
the
quick.
really, really aggressive bees, how do you recover from that, from like being stung so much? Did you have to go to the doctor or did you just kind of have to like just take care of yourself
No,
or like how can one die? Is it just like, is it from the pain and just
no.
the amount of stings, or is it venom?
It's if your body can go into shock.
Okay.
And if you go into shock,
Is that why you kind of
and
got
you
alarmed with
pass
your heart
out,
rate?
yeah, I could feel my heart rate starting to pound.
Yeah.
And that's where I could feel the adrenaline, because then all of a sudden I wasn't feeling much pain. And so you go into shock and you fall over, you're done probably at that point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But with me, I never felt like I was that close.
Oh, yeah.
If I had stayed out there, it probably could have escalated to that point.
Yeah.
If I didn't have, there's some beekeepers who won't wear a suit. They'll just like wear a veil. So they'll have a hat with a veil, and then they might have gloves, but then they wear jeans and maybe a shirt like this.
Mm-hmm.
There's some beekeepers do that. If you were caught in that scenario that I was in and you weren't wearing a full-fledged suit, you probably would have died.
Okay.
It's because they would have been stinging through your jeans. They would have been stinging you through your shirt, and you would have taken a lot more stings. It would have been a much dire situation. So there's some YouTubers. There's one in particular that I think she's the Texas bee lady. She takes a lot of criticism, and people.
I've seen her on TikTok. She's
Yeah.
very gentle
She's huge,
and very calm. And
What's her name?
Texas Bee
I
Lady.
think it's Texas Bee Works. I think it's her site.
She got really famous on TikTok.
Yeah.
Though.
So I always tell people when they ask me about her, it's like everything that I've ever heard her say is true. Everything. I've never heard her say something false. However, the perception that she's giving people about bees, especially in the wild, like what she's dealing with, is highly dangerous.
Oh yeah.
Because
I know lots of dumb girls that would. Yeah, I want to be one with the.
there is something that she's doing. Either they're scouting them beforehand, or she's wearing some kind of odor that's keeping them off her. Like whenever there's
Oh, she's not wearing the thing.
Yeah, that's why she's like famous. Yeah.
and there are female beekeepers who I know who wear their hair up or they shave their hair, because if a bee gets stuck in long hair, it's like a spider web. They'll immediately start trying to sting. And she has long blonde hair. If a bee gets stuck in that, they're stinging automatic. It's a natural response. So the fact that that's not happening on camera, it surprises me. So a lot of female bee removers call her out on this. But what I was going to get at, it's like one of the ways we clear honey super. So look, we have to talk quickly about the anatomy of a bee box. So there's usually a big bee box at the bottom. Sometimes it'll be double stacked, 2 big bee boxes, but then we put a queen excluder on top of those boxes where the worker bees can come up through it, but the queen can't. and that's where they usually build their honey. Okay, and we call them a honey super. So on those honey supers, whenever it's time to harvest, we can put something called a fume board. And some of them are solar powered, but we put a fume board on top, and that fume board basically has a cloth at the top, and we spray this odor. Usually it's called Honey Bandit, or there's Honey Be Gone, or whatever. And it's just an odor. It smells like birthday cake. But we'll put it on, and we'll put it on top of the honey super, and the bees hate the smell, and they'll push them down out of the honey supers. So whenever we want to take those honey supers, we can just take the honey super off, and there's no bees in it. Okay. There is a theory that she's wearing Honey Be Gone or Honey Bandit that's used for the honey supers to keep the bees off of her.
So you don't think that's kind of dangerous that she's not saying that? So like you're saying, because I know some girls who, out of like trying to be good for the environment, might do that, and it might end up bad.
Yeah, I know.
So-
That's kind of, like I said,
Or her and her husband are scouting the hive before they're filming it. So that could be one thing too.
but those are things to be transparent about to people who could potentially have
for
passions
sure.
for it. You know,
So I always warn people to be
that's
careful what you
dangerous.
take, because what she's saying is true. There's nothing she says it's false. It's the detail that she is able to describe it in is incredible, but the way she's approaching it is not safe.
so she knows what she's doing, but
Mhm.
she should be doing her job and letting people know how she is calming these bees down or how she is deterring them.
How she's handling them, I don't think she could do that out here. If she
Yeah.
came out here and dealt with a feral hive, she'd have to wear a suit. I've never dealt with bees that calm out here that she's
yeah.
dealing with. I don't know.
Unless she has superpowers and she could like,
Be transparent, sis.
Well,
be
do
transparent.
you know,
Like I'm just asking.
The
like,
girls share their advice.
I'm not trying to. Do women just have a different pheromone?
That's what I
that
was
might
wondering as well. Like, do women
deter the
just
beer?
have-
I mean, the beer, the bee.
I'll say this:
beer. I'm getting drunk.
there are a lot of female hobbyists that I've seen at the bee club meetings and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think I've ever met a honeybee or a beekeeper sideliner to a commercial bee. Like I've never seen a female sideliner. And when I say sideliner, these are people who kind of do what I do. They're doing removals, they're doing pollination, they're doing a bigger scale operation. And I've never seen a commercial female beekeeper either. I have seen ones that will do removals. There's some really good ones. Paula Womack is a good local one. She's really good at removals, but I don't think she does like a sideline business of pollination and all that kind of stuff. But oftentimes, whenever she can't do a removal for time reasons, she'll call me. So she's probably the most well-known one out here that I'm aware of. But she wears a suit.
Oh.
Okay.
I will say this: it's called the smoker, right?
Yeah.
So, from what I've seen, I'm very ignorant when it comes to this. I had always thought that it was some kind of, I don't know, whatever it is. I thought it like got the bees high, so it would like let their guard down, so y'all
what I
could
thought.
do what y'all could do. I didn't
I was
realize.
trying to get high.
I just thought I didn't realize that.
Bees.
I didn't realize that it could it like not messes, but it does something with the signals that they can.
No.
Right? Is that what it is now?
No, it just masks the pheromone smells and makes them want to gorge themselves in honey.
Yeah.
They think their hives on fire. So it does those two things.
Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing really.
Yeah,
else
I always thought they like get high for something.
Do bees maybe not even like on a singular level, but like as a whole? Like, do colonies have different personalities?
Oh yeah.
Or is it?
Because it's like
As a
he
whole.
said, like he knows his hive.
Yeah.
It's
Like
it's all
he
based
kind
off genetics. So you can have two gentle hives behave completely differently. I can have one that will stay on the comb and they just do their thing and they don't care that I'm even there. And then I'll even have some hives that will be erratic on the combs and even come out and fly around me, but they don't even land on me. So that happens.
Are they? I don't want to say. Is it intelligent? The word enough to know that it's you? If they recognize you?
They have scientifically proven that they do recognize faces. So if, like a beekeeper, for example, if I dealt with a hive in a poor manner, let's say that I was kind of rough on them, when I'm approaching, they'll start headbutting me before I even open up the hive. but they'll see me approaching and the boom, 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 boom. These aren't even the aggressive hives. Sometimes, like I had my daughter help me one day, and she was holding a frame for me, and a bee kind of came up and landed on her veil and just started crawling, and it spooked her, and she dropped the frame, and boom, it hit the ground, and they all flew up. It was like this tornado of bees. And that hive, for about 2.5 months, they knew who I was, and they
were mad at you.
Oh yeah, they recognized my face, and it has been scientifically proven that they do recognize faces. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's important that you treat them well, because if you treat them bad and you're rough on them, like if you shake them off the comb, or if you're trying to look for a queen and you're kind of rough on the queen, and just based off the pheromone smells they're put in the air, as long as they're, I mean, you work the hive gentle, like you're not rough, you're not like boom. You're not moving fast. You're moving gentle. You're being smooth and easy, because if you're rough on them, they will remember you. And intelligent is not really the right word. They communicate intelligently, it seems, but it's all pheromone based and it's reactive based. So if a bee is experiencing, like if I'm putting the frame down and there's a bee crawling underneath the frame and I kind of push it by accident, it will be scared and it will instinctively throw out that alarm pheromone or some kind of pheromone that it's endangered, and the other bees around it will react. It's all reaction based off pheromones and how they communicate, but I would not call it intelligence.
Just because I want to know what your answer is, do you think, because I have been, speaking of Joe Rogan, thinking about, do you think as collectively that bees are conscious, have some sort of consciousness? Because all this you're telling me is like, how do they know what to do?
It's at a very basic biological level, because they even know when to replace their queen. They know when to swarm. And it's all based off their environment and how they just know what it takes to survive it. I still lean more to instinctive, but they're doing it collectively. Like they're instinctively doing it collectively and making these decisions. But they recognize faces as an evolutionary development to predators. So like bears, yeah. Okay. They're going to recognize a bear, and bears look different too. Bees' eyesights are far greater than ours. They can see UV light. Okay. Their eyes are so attuned.
What does that mean? Like heat or something?
No, it's like the ultraviolet light. So like the different colors that we don't see in our atmosphere and from the sun. Okay. They can see different colors that we don't even see. And what's wild is their body is so attuned with their eyesight that even when the wind is blowing the flower, when they're approaching that flower, they can see where it's going to be even with the wind, and they'll land on it. Even in high wind scenarios, they're incredibly attuned to all that stuff. So like I said, it's probably a very basic level.
But you think it's there?
I think it's instinctive. I think it looks intelligent, but I would say it's instinctive.
Yeah. That's a different looking eye. Like just, yeah. It's wicked looking.
That does not even look like a bee.
Have you seen a...
That's not a bee.
Oh, it's not a bee.
That's not a bee.
All right.
These are so ugly.
That's not a honeybee, but that's a bee. Let's go to... This is a honeybee.
Which one?
Have you seen Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie?
Yeah, see, that's a honeybee. There's even hair on their eyes.
Was that an ant?
What? No, it was a wasp of some type.
What is it called again when they release the
pheromone? Yeah,
pheromone. Every time, like let's say if there was like a bee right here and I were to kill that bee, does that release it automatically? Not necessarily, no. And there'd have to be other bees around for it to respond.
Oh, okay. But what's interesting is when they set that alarm phone, they actually mark you. Sometimes, like they'll if they're in the hive, they'll just spread it there. But if they're on your face and they're trying to sting you, oftentimes it's like a puff of air. You can feel a puff of air. It's like their wings are pushing that pheromone onto your face, and it's like it's marking you. And all of a sudden, you have more bees coming to that spot, and
you tell me all this? I'm like, there has to be something behind all this. You know, I mean, maybe it is just instinct. I don't know. That's crazy.
Because we were in because me and my dad, we do tile work, and we did this ranch out in Matador, and there was just bees like crazy everywhere.
There's a lot of bees in there.
And I remember, like, you know, when I had to go get a, you know, refill a water bucket or something like that, I could just feel them just like fly right by me, and a lot of times they would like hit like my ear too and just fly off.
You sure it wasn't a head butt?
It might have been, but now that you say, it might have been.
The only time they'll headbutt you is if you're in the proximity of a hive.
Oh, okay.
So you may have been close to a hive and not realized it.
Probably.
But here's a cool story for you when they're in the cotton flows. Have any of y'all been fly fishing?
No.
So no trout fishing at all in a river or anything like that?
I wish.
Yeah.
Okay, have you seen videos of just trout that kind of just hover in the water? And what they're doing is those rivers are like a buffet line. So they'll just kind of hover in the current. And
For
then
insects?
They'll wait, huh?
For insects?
Yeah, like they're waiting for insects that are floating by and then just come up and grab one. Okay. So during the cotton flow, and I've seen this every year now, you start seeing a lot of dragonflies. And dragonflies are one of the most successful predators on Earth. Their attack rate or their attack success rate is like 97%. Like they're just that effective at killing and eating. Well, when those cotton blooms are going, like you can actually walk and kind of stand between the cotton field and the hives, and it sounds like an airport. The bees are about 7 to 8 feet high off the ground, and they're kind of going to and from, just boom, 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 boom. Like you can see the lanes that they're going to and from those cotton fields. Well, these dragonflies will pull up like fish, and they'll just hover right in those lanes. And they're just hovering there waiting for the bees to come by. And they know they're coming because they're going to the cotton fields. And you can just watch them. And there's hundreds of them. And I'm not talking about these small ones. I'm talking about these big, fat dragonflies. And they're just like fish hovering in water. And they're just waiting for these bees to fly by. And then they'll go and just grab them. And they'll just stay there until they're filled. And they're it's wild to watch. It's
Where's
beautiful.
this at?
This is just out at my bee yard. You can just watch them going to from the cotton fields. You can stand in their lane and you can hear them above your head going to and from. And then you can, depending on where they are, the dragonflies will kind of school up together and they'll just wait for them to pass by. And they'll just grab them as they pass by.
This question just popped up. This might seem like a stupid question. Like the bees that you keep at your house, do you ever have to like move them around? Because now I'm thinking like, do predators of bees know that you have them there?
Oh, yeah.
So do you have to like kind of rotate them out a little bit?
No, I mean,
or you just keep them protected?
I've got mine protected by some pretty good fence lines, and I've got dogs that help.
Oh, okay.
But skunks are probably the biggest issue in terms of predators out here because we don't have bears.
How's the closest thing you get is a skunk?
Yeah, and my dog has been sprayed by a skunk before out there. But the skunks usually come out at night, and what they do is they don't even grab the honey. They're trying to eat the bees. So they'll get in there, and what they do is they scratch at the entrance, and then a guard bee will kind of come out to inspect, and it's dark, and the bees don't fly when it's dark, and they'll just go whoop and chew it up before it can sting, and they'll just kind of keep it in like a pouch, and they'll just keep grabbing more like peanuts almost, and then they'll swallow some. Yeah, skunks will do that.
Are wasps considered predators for bees? Okay,
most definitely.
I've heard of that before.
Yeah, they're not as like I've actually got a video of one. I was doing an inspection once while taking a video of all things, and a wasp came in and tried to take a bee, and the whole hive responded and grabbed it.
I
saw the like a little. What you find?
I've seen where they do that with those killer wasps you was talking about. They cook them.
Yeah, those aren't honeybees in this area though.
Oh.
That's more of like the Asian honeybees. Yeah. Our European honeybees don't do that. Let's see if I can help you find it. I hope I posted it. It's going to be close. It's that right there. While doing an inspection 2 years ago, caught this video. Watched that one. It's only like 12 seconds, but yeah, that's it right there. So the wasp lands right there, and the bees immediately respond.
They're just ganging up on them.
They throw them down the hive.
As they
Those
should.
little yellow jackets.
As they should. Look at them.
Do they eat it when they kill it?
No.
Or they just kill it?
They'll just kick it out of the hive.
These are very like I mean, to me it just seems like intelligence. Maybe it's just
that's why like I just have this new like empathy for him, or this new like respect for him. Like I literally, you have turned me into like a save the bees asshole.
We'll
You really
buy a
did.
beekeeper. I mean, a beekeeper, a water. What do you call it?
A little water
Yeah.
fountain, yeah. And then my dad's gonna be like, "Oh, you'll save the bees, but not Gomez."
Buy him one too. Bird feeders momentally.
Yeah, no, I totally will. We gotta find.
Birds will eat them. Dragonflies. We have something called an assassin fly. It looks like kind of a hybrid between a dragonfly and a fly. I've got pictures of that actually out there too. But like, what's fun is the birds will just kind of hover on the fence line and they'll just wait, and they'll go, whoop, they'll jump off the fence line and grab one and sit back down. And so even keeping bees, I mean, you would think a lot of them are getting eaten, but that queen's laying so many eggs a day. There's no way that they're consuming that many. So you're actually supporting your local wildlife in weird ways as well. I've even had lizards kind of come up to the dog bowl and or frogs, excuse me, like the toads will sit at the bowl and just grab bees as they come in. So it's wild to watch. We never had praying mantis in my house.
I love praying mantis.
We have them now. They're on the zinnias in our front flower bed. Those hang out on the zinnia at the bottom or at the base of the flower, and the bee will come in. They go and they'll grab the bee right off the flower. It's wild.
Dude.
Are spiders a big threat to bees, or is that more like when they get caught in the web?
It's more of when they get caught in the web.
Okay.
So I mean, they have so many things eat bees. It's wild.
I'll bleep it out. Where do you live at?
We're out west.
Yes.
No. It's not like this close. I mean, I do have neighbors, but we're like an acre or 2 acres apart.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I can keep hives out there. And what's wild is I've always told them if they have a bee issue, just let me know. I've learned quickly that bees will actually in the winter feed on chicken feed. They're not actually eating the bird seed of it. These bird seeds are coated in like a powdery substance, and the bees will take the powdery substance off the seeds as like a pollen substitute during the winter. So if you're feeding your chickens midday and it's above 60 degrees outside, you're going to have bees on your chicken feed. And so they had to adjust when they were feeding their chickens, either to the early morning or late afternoon or at dawn, or excuse me, dusk. And so there's been a few adjustments like that, but my neighbors have been great. They've planted like flowering trees. They've planted.
That's what I would ask. Like, are they pretty supportive or just understanding of it?
It's great. And sometimes they'll have other bug issues, and like there's like, hey, we got bees all over this tree. Can you come look? And I'll go over there, and there's like wasps. They're not even bees. Sometimes they are, but I'm just like, hey, they're just pulling pollen off of this right now, and they're not. When bees are on a plant, they don't care about you at all. Like, you can walk like this close and you can watch them, and they're not going to be angry with you at all. If you breathe on them a little bit, they might take off, but they're not going to. The only time a bee will actually try to sting you is if you're close to their hive or if you're a threat. As long as you're not a threat, you can get as close as you want. You could hold them. You can let them crawl on your finger. You're fine.
So when snowstorms come in, how does that affect
That's a good question.
So like when the snow apocalypse came a few years ago, how was that time for?
That was rough. So bees handle cold really well. They really do. What bees don't handle well is lack of food when it's cold, and when it's cold and wet. If moisture gets inside their hive and it's cold, they don't do well. I lost about 80% of my hives in that storm.
Oh man!
Usually when it's that cold and it's snowing, they tell beekeepers to keep your hives out there because they'll take care of themselves better than you will. But that storm, like I think at our house, our temperature was at -12. During the day, it got down to -12. The wind was howling, and it wasn't wet, but the trees were bent over from ice. Like it was blowing in sideways, and the ice was developing on the trees, and the trees started to warp and face down. So that's coming into your hive too. And so you're going to laugh at this because I don't know how my wife got through this. I moved. I got 3 hives were alive at that point, and I brought them into the garage, and it was still so cold in the garage that I lost another one. So I was down to 2 hives, and I basically put hardware cloth on their entrances, and I put them in our laundry room with a space heater, and that's the only way they got through that storm.
Oh, man.
Otherwise, I would have lost all of them. Now, it's a double-edged sword to do that. Now I'm getting a little technical that most of your viewers may not care about, but when you do that, the bees get more active because now they're in a heated room. They're wanting to get out of their hives. They're wanting to defecate because they don't defecate inside their hive. They defecate outside their hive. So when the heat comes up, they feel like they can go out and use the bathroom or they can go out and forage. So they're trying to get out. Okay. And they start consuming food because now instead of being in a tight ball, they're in the hive exploring and eating. Okay. So you don't really want them to do that during cold weather. That's why it's better to obviously keep them outside. But it was so extreme in that storm that just went out the window. Like it became a matter of like, they either going to survive or I'm going to let them die. The following year, I implemented a new strategy and it was highly effective, but I put foam boards. I basically cut foam boards in the shape of their hives. I went to Home Depot and just got those huge sheets of foam board. And then I duct taped, wrapped them around their hives. And I did it for a whole winter. And I had 100% survival. I didn't lose a single hive.
I love that.
So I did that last winter and it was highly successful. And I'm going to do it again. I've already got a stockpile of foam boards for this coming winter.
Man, that was a brutal winter.
I mean, plus that was like a once in a lifetime storm.
Once in 100 years.
Well, and it hurt me for pollination because it hit in February, I believe.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so everything that was starting to flower, all of a sudden the flowers just went away. Like the strawberries, they're starting to sprout in February and they start to bloom in late March. The whole strawberry fields just died. There was no strawberries that year. And so I had no pollination contracts, nothing that year. And then COVID made it even worse.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that was brutal, man.
So that was probably our worst year we've ever had. I cannot imagine it being worse than what that year was.
What is so bees poop outside there?
Mhm.
What happens to that poop? Do anything eat it? It just goes away.
I'm sure other thefts eat it, but I mean,
It doesn't
they
attract
usually,
nothing, or they don't utilize it or anything.
No, they don't utilize it like that. No, nothing like that. They just usually you just kind of see them kind of swarming outside their entrance, like flying. And it looks like if they really got to go, like after that storm, when I undid that hardware cloth from putting them back outside, I popped it off and they kind of flooded out and they started flying. And they had to go because they were in there for like 7 straight days. They couldn't get out because that storm lasted 5 to 7 days.
It was a long time.
So when they finally got out, they were big and plump, like they're fat, okay, and it almost looked like brown rain. He was getting on the side of the hive and everything. It was wild.
Son of a bitch.
But most of them, when they're outside flying and looking for food, they're defecating when they're flying. But yeah, you probably wouldn't see it most of the time. And I doubt much is eating it because it's just randomly scattered through the yard.
You're a beekeeper. How do you become a bee? Is that like a title you give yourself, or is it like an official title? You know what I mean?
I think that's.
I was gonna ask that way earlier. I just
If
never
you
got
have a
chance to.
beehive in your backyard, you probably consider yourself a beekeeper.
Okay,
Like there's really, we break it down to 3 categories. You're a hobbyist, you're a sideliner, or you're a commercial operation.
And you're a sideliner, right?
I am somewhere between a hobbyist and a sideliner.
I mean, you're essentially invested into beekeeping,
Yes.
so.
It is an income source for me, so I would consider myself at least a professional beekeeper.
Right.
Am I a multimillionaire? No.
Would you ever want to go that route if you could?
If it's already heading in the direction of a large scale sideliner. I've got it doesn't sound like a lot, but 10 hives is quite a bit. Like I've been told that once you have 40 hives, it's a full-time job.
Well, brother, 1 hive sounds like a lot. So that's. I want 1 hive though. I want to do that. That seems fun.
Is it? And I mean, because I know like it's getting late and everything, but like with you saying like how it's like kind of expanding and stuff like that, is there like a point where it becomes almost like unethical and you start kind of crossing those lines into like with like the almond thing, kind of we're kind of talking about it, where you kind of where it gets harmful for the bees, or with what you're doing, could you just kind of have as many as
I think I know where you're going, but
yeah, I don't know if I worded it right, but
you can have too many hives for a particular area because of the food. that they're grabbing. You can have too many bees in the area that it's almost like the reason why we have deer hunting. There's a reason you have hunting of deer in Texas.
To limit the population.
You limit the population because they can literally starve themselves. There's so many deer can be in the population that they can starve themselves. Bees are no different in the sense that if you have too many in one area, they can consume the entire food source to where other bee hives can't get enough food to survive, and they can starve each other out. So the biggest operation, which unfortunately no longer exists in our area, have any of you ever heard of PEP, Texas? It's not far from here. It's out there close to Morton, kind of between Sudan, Morton. Really just Sudan and Morton kind of area. If you go kind of in between, there's a really small place called PEP, Texas. And this guy had 750 hives. Okay. He made his income by selling bees. He would sell packages of bees to hobbyists around the country. And he would sell his honey excess to like breweries and things that people who want to make their own alcohol. And so that he would wholesale those because honey at that point is a byproduct. It's not really an actual feasible product because you're not going to sell that much honey at retail. You're going to sell that at wholesale to distributors or people who need to buy it in bulk. But with 750 hives, he had 3 bee yards scattered across that county to keep them separated far enough apart where they weren't cannibalizing their food source. Mm-hmm. So you do like the place, like where I'm at now, I don't like to go above 7 where I'm at right now. I'm at 10 at the moment. And that really is too much. Now, when the cotton flows or blooms, it's fine. There's tons of food. You can have hundreds of hives everywhere out there. But during the course of the year, it's different. But if the land agreement I'm trying to get works out, there's going to be about 42 acres of CRP land with cotton fields around it as well. And I could probably easily hit 100 hives with food supplementations. Mm-hmm. Like 100 hives is excessive for 42 acres. But if I want to make any kind of revenue, I need to have a lot more. And I would need to substitute the lack of food with dry pollen, sugar water, or high fructose corn syrup, or that kind of stuff, things that they can feed on. And the amount of revenue generated by that many hives would support that as well. Mm-hmm. But eventually, if I can get enough hives to make California affordable and profitable, I would totally do that because there's guys they're making millions of dollars doing that. It's a ton of work, and you typically have to, once you get over 40 hives, you need to hire help.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
So you're paying employees at that point and so forth. But at this point, I try to grow every year, and every year I've done this, I've doubled it. Like, not the hives, but just the revenue has doubled every single year.
Brad, do me a favor.
Yeah.
Can you exit that video?
Oh, it's my bad.
I keep seeing movement. It's bothering me. Sorry.
It's Antward.
Yeah, it's bothering me.
So as long as it's making money, I'm going to keep doing it.
That's awesome.
And it's grown. Like, I've been doing this since 2019, and this year alone, I've done 5 interviews or / podcast now.
No, I love that
thanks
though,
for coming
because it's
on
like,
again.
thank you, because it's like, this and maybe like 1 or 2 other of these interviews have like really impacted me, or kind of like really, really made me think, and I really appreciated this interview, honestly. And this is really cool.
I knew we were going to have a good time.
Yeah, and like he had been talking about it, but we had a rancher here last summer. And that was one of the most enlightening conversations. I went into it so scared that I was going to be like, that I was going to hate him, or I was going to be like, ew, or like, because I'm not going to stop eating meat, but I don't like the cruelty that it takes to get on my plate, and just like the compassion he had, and like the gratitude he had for like the sustenance that it provided, it just switched my thinking, and like with you, it's like the way you kind of described like these bees and like their lifespan, and like, kind of how they have like this like community role. It was just really interesting, but also like the care that you take into it, and like the studying that you did. Like, you are not somebody who's just like, I'm a beekeeper now, like you're legitimately like, you're all in, you're about it. Like it was a cool interview.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. This is one of my favorite interviews.
Much like Robin's, this is very reassuring, and I have a new like you're saying, a new outlook. I think the future, we might be all right. the news feeds us some bullshit, and I buy into it sometimes. That's my fault, but
Well, and those numbers that the media is feeding you, like the bees are dying out, they're the only measurable numbers when it comes to bees is the commercial operations, because those are the only people that are actually managing the numbers of those hives. And they report them because they have to have state certifications, and they have to report those hive numbers. So that's where their measurements are coming from, because it's actual pure data. But they don't know how many bees are in the wild. There's no one out there walking the ranches, looking in the tree hollows. They have no idea how many hobbyists there are that are keeping bees in their backyard. So it's not that they just can't physically get those numbers. So it's hard to perceive that, and it's easy to look at the data. If you're living in a big city, you see these numbers, and it's hard to realize that those are the commercial operations. And the reason those numbers in the commercial operations are going so down is because they're putting those bees in hazardous environments on these orchards that have to be sprayed for other pests, and the bees are collateral damage.
Essentially.
But they still have to have them, and then they have to pay those beekeepers for those hazards, and so and those beekeepers know how to replenish those numbers, and
it's like although they're being compensated, it does come with the price of like harming them in that sense.
I don't want to underplay, like, we're not going to get into my kind of political views, but I was not a big go green kind of guy.
Yeah.
And I'm still not huge on it, but after mainly because I realize the other factors that come into play, but after beekeeping and doing the research I have done, global warming is definitely affecting bees in a very negative way. And surprisingly, it's not in the hot months, but it's in the cold months. Mainly because when the beekeepers now, this is going to sound wild to you, and beekeepers now are using a method called cold storage. They're taking these bee boxes of hives, and they're stacking each other up on it, and they're putting them on pallets, and they're forklifting them, and they're putting them in these warehouses that are climate controlled, and they're holding them at 40 degrees the entire winter. So inside the warehouse, there's hundreds upon hundreds of bee colonies stacked like a warehouse, and the temperature is 40 degrees no matter what it is outside the whole time. And that's like the perfect temperature in the winter for them, because they're not like over consuming their food, because they're not having to generate a ton of heat to stay alive. So they're using less food, and they're not needing to get out, because the bees don't really start flying until it's about 60 degrees. Sometimes I see them out when 55 degrees. So it's cold enough they don't come out flying, but it's not so cold that they're not consuming a ton of food. Well, in the wild, our winters are erratic. We had, some days we hit like 9-10 degrees, and then the next day it's 60, 65. Well, when it's that hot, they come out and they go foraging. So they're using energy to go look for food, and they come back when they don't have anything. They're consuming the food that's in the hive, and so they deplete their food source when it gets too warm during the winter. And then all of a sudden February hits, and we're getting slammed with super cold weather, and there's no food, and they've run out, and then they starve. That's usually when we lose our hives, is February in this area of Texas. So
Makes
the
sense.
warmer winters is actually what's hurting us. It's not the hotter summers, typically, right now. So if that continues, beekeepers are going to have to start feeding more consistently when they keep their hives outside, and that takes money. Prices are going to have to go up on honey that we sell. Prices are going to have to go up on removals that we do. Any kind of things that we have to sell, services or products, are going to go up in price to be able to support them to get through winter, because they're so erratic.
Right.
And the more prices go up, it just gets harder.
It's just like
Can I
never
ask you
ending.
this?
Yeah.
Amongst beekeepers and maybe farmers too, is there an overall consensus that, I don't know about global, but there's a global something like global climate
There's some
change.
type of like
Climate
global
change is
crisis
happening.
I guess.
That they're acknowledging at this point.
If you don't approach it from a political stance,
Let's know.
if you take your political stance out of it, the numbers are undeniable.
Like it's obvious that we're like
Like you're saying with the bees.
We're
'cause-
getting warmer now.
Yeah.
Whether that's a part of the earthly cycle that we haven't really recorded, that's to be debated. I don't really care. All I know is, as a beekeeper, the winter months are warmer, and I'm seeing it affect my bees, especially in our area. And it's hard when February hits, and we've had a warm December because like
it was a very mild winter.
Like winter. In December we had a 90-degree day.
Oh, I mean, it was 80 degrees on Christmas Day. I ran that morning, you know.
I was in Phoenix on that day. Yeah.
And then 2 days later, it's like 30s, 40s, you know.
And so like when you have that erratic, they consume more food. There's no stability for them. So a colder winter is actually better for bees, ironically.
So are you saying those like warehouses are pretty good for them?
Oh, it's already been statistically proven.
Do they have them around here?
Effective, huh?
Do you guys have them around here? No.
Those are really for the commercial guys. They build it themselves.
People with money.
Yeah. Well, they've already established. They've built. It started in Canada actually, and it's now you're seeing it in Montana and Idaho, and in the Dakotas primarily. But it's continuing to move southward. That practice has continued to move southward, and I think it's just a matter of time before it's a common practice.
Is it also frustrating, again, to take things from a scientific approach, but inevitably politics get involved? You know what I mean? Like I think a lot of people now, especially our age, like to involve politics in science. Like I don't think those things should be. Does that bother you in a sense? You know what I mean? Like even with climate change, because somehow climate change has become political.
It has been politicized.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say who it was with, but I had probably more of a discussion than a debate. But, you know, you try to approach this from a beekeeper's perspective, and you try to describe that, you know, these warmer temperatures are affecting us in ways that are very apparent. And then they turn it political. And then it becomes about their political stance and why they believe what they believe. And it becomes not even about the bees anymore. And it just that's not why we just started this discussion.
Is that the part
that's what
annoys you?
Yeah, that part does annoy me.
Yeah.
Everything else, people pretty much, they don't know enough about bees to really know what they're talking about. But they think they know about the climate discussion because of their political views. And really their political view, it's really about who thinks that they have the solution. And some people believe that their solution is about legislation, and then some believe it's about deregulation deregulation. And really, they're both double-edged swords in their own rights.
That's the wild part.
Yeah, and really, just like I said, with the beekeeping side of things, it's more about the farmer and the beekeeper collaborating because they're both benefiting from the bees, and they both need them badly. And so it's just finding the common ground and not going political.
Is there effort to stop that? The beekeeper and the farmers talking?
No, not that I'm aware.
No, you guys.
I mean,
keep pretty good.
The pharmaceutical companies are actually who are producing the majority of these pesticides, and so they have a financial incentive to keep pushing their product to keep the numbers up and their investors happy. But I know in Europe, a lot of different pesticides have already been banned and not allowed for use. And when we joined, the United States, I think it was with Obama, but I don't remember exactly, but there was a big push to ban neonicotinoids, and Europe banned it. And then I think it was Obama, he banned it, and it really hurt the farmers because prices may be different in Europe than they are here in the United States. And so their alternative to neonicotinoids was just outrageously expensive, and it really hurt them. And then when Trump came in, he was big pushing to deregulate a lot of things. And he deregulated them. Well, then it started hurting the bees. And I think we've already discussed this in some fashion, but prices can greatly affect how the lobbyists push that. I think if the alternative solutions were cheaper, I don't think this would even be an issue. But price drives a lot of what people can and can't do. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to neonicotinoids, it's all about the price. It's cheap, it's abundant, and it's highly effective. Problem is it's too effective against bees. But I mean, if you're a farmer, I mean, farmers are the only people that buy at retail and sell at wholesale.
I mean, it's like they got to do their job.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just, yeah.
They're working on thin margins, and they're losing their shorts on some years. And the only thing they're living on is insurance money from their failed crops. And so it's hard to go against those guys because they're putting themselves in such a bad, like not being bad, they're putting themselves in a position that a lot of people would not, and they're feeding the world. So it's hard to stand against those
Yeah.
individuals. So it's better to work with them. And like what I say, when I was working with my farmer, I mean, he was telling me when he was spraying certain stuff, and that was extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
But also, it's like you're like on a smaller scale in that sense too, you know. So
Yeah,
it's easier for you to manage that.
you can't really do that with a commercial operation because you're dealing with tens of thousands of hives, and you'd have to get out there with forklifts.
It's just
And
a necessary
it's just
evil.
not-
Yeah.
So you just expect loss at that point, and they compensate you for that. Beforehand, you're going in there with the expectations that you're going to lose some of your hives,
Mm-hmm.
and it's you're either losing it to the diseases from the other bees that the other commercial guys are bringing in, or you're losing it from being sprayed from pesticides. So
Okay.
I think I know the answer to this question, and I kind of seen it with Robin. It hurts you when you lose a hive, right?
yeah, because you feel like you made a mistake. You feel like it's on you. I have not. I've been lucky. Now, aside from the winter storm, I've only lost. No, it was all the winter storm. I've only lost in extreme weather conditions.
Mm-hmm.
I have had some hives escond, and that means they left. They just picked up and left. That's happened to me twice.
But is that in your control
No.
or is that just nature?
The bees are wild.
Yeah.
I mean, you manage them. I mean, they're essentially a livestock, but they're not like cattle. They're not tame. They're wild
like they're not
creatures.
yours to keep. Like
No, they're a wild creature
Yeah.
that belongs in the wild, and they behave as such. And so you do what you can to maintain that they stay and are productive for you. But essentially, you're borrowing them from nature at that
right.
point.
You're giving them an environment to
Yeah.
like thrive in.
I asked that because I could see because I learned that with livestock, like in a larger scale, you might be all right with losing. Like you're saying, you lose a hive, it's really nothing off of you. When you have smaller ones, you're more connected to them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, even with 10, like you feel it. So like last year, gosh, it was rough. Like we were down to 2 hives after that storm, and I bounced back to about 6 by the time the cotton started blooming. But out of that 6, only 4 of them were producing excess honey to where I could harvest.
Mm-hmm.
And of those 4, I pulled only 160 pounds, but 160 pounds at $15 a pound is still a pretty decent chunk of money as a side hustle. And then this year's, we did the foam boards, and they all made it through winter. And I've got 10 hives, and 9 of them are ready for cotton. I mean,
Nice.
they're a full load, full population. They're finding plenty of food, even though we hadn't had a lot of rain. We had where we are at. We had 4 inches on our last rain by itself, and the flowers are everywhere. And so they're finding plenty of food, and their numbers they're healthy. And so I'm expecting almost 3 times what I made last year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've been lucky so far, and the queens have been very healthy as well. Sometimes the queens will die for various reasons or be replaced. And
Having like local or smaller scale people, is that just not for like you can't feed people at this scale with like smaller local people, right? It's just not not an option anymore.
there's just the whole economy out here would have to change. Like we'd have to go from cotton to more produce.
Yeah.
And that's just, we're fine right now the way we are. Now, if we needed to, gosh, I hope the Ogallala aquifer would have enough water, but we would have to consume more water to produce the produce to support the area. Cotton, I mean, we water it, but I don't think it takes near enough. It doesn't take near the water that produce takes. So we probably could do it for maybe a decade or 2, but we probably would run out of water if we went to full produce. I think we would run the aquifer dry to do that.
How old are your kids?
I got a 10-year-old, 8-year-old, and a soon-to-be 5-year-old.
Do you think are you hopeful for the future for them? Realistically?
We're getting off the bees now, but
No, yeah, I mean, just in
I think that they're going to have a harder life than we had. I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and life seemed to be pretty abundant. But really, and I'm not saying 9/11 is the issue, but it seemed to about 9/11 to the recession of 08, that area, we had a shift. And life has not really been what it was since then. Not just politically, but just life seems to be harder. And so I do think my kids will struggle to be as I don't think they'll even know what life was like before those time periods. It will just naturally be more difficult, and I think it'll just be like normal life for them. My grandkids, however, I think it's going to have it really rough. I think it's going to be really rough. I mean, I think food prices are going to be very expensive, mainly because there's a lot of mouths to feed. The demand's going to be higher than the supply, and so food's going to be really expensive. I do think we'll eventually. I do think that eventually the economy will level out and go back to at least a form of normalcy. I don't know for how long. I mean, obviously, various world events can change that.
Yeah.
But just if nothing bad like that happens, I mean, I think our economy will restabilize. But I don't think food prices will get cheaper. I think it will continue to rise. Unfortunately, we would almost have to have some kind of global catastrophe, like a famine, or I don't know, another bad war, or even a pestilence, to reduce the overall population of the world to kind of fix our food price issue. But I mean, that's at a very high cost. And you'd have to lose a lot of lives to make that happen. Either that, or we would have to find another scientific way to make the food more abundant at a very cheap cost, which I don't see happening.
You don't see that as a possibility?
There's not enough fresh water in the world.
Do you think any of your kids have any of them expressed interest in like your beekeeping
No,
and stuff?
they're scared to death of them.
Do you almost prefer it that way? Or?
I don't really care if they get into it or not.
Yeah. But like these videos, you said like you just kind of show it to them. Just
they like watching the videos, and they're
it's so
fascinated.
interesting. Yeah.
They just, when you get we have a suit, an extra suit for them to wear, but every time I get them in a suit and they go out there, they get scared.
Oh, I would be the same way.
Yeah.
I'm all about like save the bees, but like, you know, I respect it. I respect nature and what it does. Like, I'm not gonna go fuck with it.
I want to go out there, man. I want to see that shit. That seems fun. Oh no.
You know, what's weird is when you go out on CRP land, like, cause some of that strawberry stuff, they have me put the hive on CRP land and they go over to the strawberries, but the CRP land is just loaded with ticks. So you got to have
that's even worse.
you have to
It's even worse than the bees.
I have to put like off or even duct tape around the bottom half of my feet. And when the bees smell off, it pisses them off to no end. They hate the smell of off, and they get mad every time I approach them. If I've got off on me, they get super angry. So anyway, that's just a small little nugget of information.
Ticks are weird. They carry diseases.
Yeah.
Well, man, I really appreciate you coming.
This is the most awesome
Talking.
interview ever. Like,
Hope you had a good time. I had a good time. This
Well,
is
thanks for
awesome.
having me.
oh yeah,
This was fun.
Awesome.
If somebody needs a bee removal, where can they hit you up at?
Just send me a Facebook message.
Facebook?
Like, just go to that page, Tumbleweed Bees, and send me a message. And I preface this because recently I was unable to do a removal for this guy. Not all bees can be saved. I preface that. Even though we try, not all bees can be saved based off where they're located. This particular hive was a Spanish architecture-based building behind a limestone wall with a Spanish roof. And they were 3 stories high, and there was no safe way to remove it without like destroying the side of the building. And the architecture of the building, to find someone to fix that damage, to get them out, doesn't really exist out here. So
you would have chipped
Was that
a
at
piece
Tech?
of house to
it's not.
save
So
those
not all
bees.
bees can be saved, and I've seen them in spigot wells. Like they've removed the spigot. Sometimes the bees will go down into the well. You can't get them out of there, and you can't poison them because it drips into the water system. So it just, you can't do anything about those. It's like there are certain removals that you physically cannot do. So I don't guarantee it, but I will. If there's a beehive, I will not do it for free unless it's a swarm. It financially is not responsible on my behalf because I have to feed and house these bees. But yeah, my prices are there for a reason, and I will help people if they need help.
Do you have an estimated timeline when you have honey? Do you have an estimated timeline when you'll have honey available for sale again?
The best time is usually late September, early October is usually when the local honey is available. And you got to be careful of these farmers markets because not most of that honey being sold is not actually local. There's even some people at the Wolfers Farmers Market that's buying their honey from Georgia. And they're just
oh, you sons of bitch! Sorry, liars.
But so we always say, know your beekeeper. I'm not the only beekeeper that's selling honey. A really good friend of mine named Tom Jackson. He's a former Marine. He owns Grunt's Bee Farm. He sells legit.
So they're
honey.
solid. They tell the truth.
He sells legit honey.
Okay, cool. We'll go for them too.
Yeah. So, and he'd be a fun one probably to interview sometime too if you.
Well,
want
tell him to come on, please. Tell him about me, and I'm gonna hit him up.
Yeah, he and I treat him as an equal. There's not many people in this area that I find that are above my knowledge level. There are a few I can count. I think there's about 3 that I think are really well beyond me. But Tom and I, we kind of started around the same time. We've grown kind of the same time, and we rely on each other. Like we compete technically on the market, but
For sure.
we don't compete at the same time. Like we share knowledge. If I've got a spare queen, I call him up. If there's a removal I can't do, I ask him, and vice versa. He'll call me if he can't get to something quick enough. So a lot of these beekeepers work together. So there's another guy at I don't know his company name, but he has beehives in Slide, Texas, and he's legit too. So there's about 2 that I'm aware of currently that are at the farmers market. But if there's a lot of the produce people are selling honey and it's not local. It's
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. So anyway,
I'm gonna ask y'all where y'all's honey's from, just to be petty, just to
Ask them if they know New Zealand.
Yeah.
But yeah,
and
man.
you
Hey,
can
thanks
ask,
again.
and they have to tell you like, and they'll be like, they're not trying to be
They'll
dishonest.
be like Georgia.
They're selling their honey and they'll tell you where it's from.
Like it's
typically.
local from Georgia.
At least it's U.S. based.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not,
yeah.
They're not.
But I'm more willing to buy Texas, though.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie to you.
I don't think they're selling fake honey. Like
No,
a lot
yeah,
of
no,
supermarkets
no.
are selling fake honey, and they don't even know it because it's actually illegal in the United States to sell fake honey, but they don't even know it's fake when it's on the shelf. And then anyway.
No, I mean, no.
whole-
Okay.
Well, it's
I mean,
one
but
thing-
like before we finish that out, that's the same shit with like hair products, like at Walmart and Target. You know, like it's not that it's like a legal product. It's just it's not what you're gonna get. You know, so I get what you're saying. It's just like no, it's not.
No, I'm saying it's different to sell Georgia honey and label it as Morton, Texas honey. You know what I mean? That's like a little bit
I
different.
don't think they're mislabeling it. They'll have honey out in jars.
And they won't even label it.
There's probably not even a label on it.
Oh.
And if you ask them where it's from, they'll probably tell you it's from this place or that place. They're not trying to be dishonest. They're
Sorry,
they're
guys.
legit selling honey. But
All right,
if you want true
I can rock with
local honey, I mean, you got to know who your beekeepers are. And those are the guys that you know it's legit. They're not buying other people's honey because I don't buy any other honey. What I pull off of removals and my own hives,
That's awesome.
that's mine. Like, and I don't sell even removal honey because it's illegal to sell removal honey in Texas. There's a law against it. There's a common food law. I think
So the shit the stuff you sell is from your
it's
backyard.
from my backyard beehives.
Sorry,
that's what I'm allowed to sell because they're managed hives. But removal, when I do a removal, the honey I pull off the removal, I just consume myself because I can't legally sell it.
Dude,
All the way
Again.
from Wolford, Texas.
again, thank you for being here.
Yes.
You're welcome.
This is awesome.
Thanks for having me.
I had a good time. Bradley, anything?
No, yeah, I had a fun time. I mean, there was a lot of things that I thought I knew, but were totally wrong.
I want to go on record and saying I would like to continue this conversation another time because I still have a lot of fucking questions. If we can do it again,
Well,
we can wait a few months and then
We can bring you back whenever you have honey.
Yeah, we can do that.
We can talk about your season and how that goes. You know.
if that's all right.
That's
Yes.
Cool, sweet.
I'm like, come back.
Jen,
No, I mean, like,
yeah, for sure, come back.
we're homies now. We're homies. You're my bee friend. I'm a save the bee
Well,
type
keep
girl.
track of us on Facebook. That's where it's
Metalheads
We
for
got you.
bees.
We'll put you up. We'll put the link to all you.
Cholo
You even
Grass
have an
for
Instagram.
bees.
That's where I found you first. Then I DM'd you on Facebook. So
And I I think I mainly post on Instagram, but I make it share to Facebook, and I even make it share to Twitter. I don't even really use Twitter, but it's there.
Well, we'll shout you out on Twitter because we use it. Hell yeah, man! Thank you. Hell yeah, guys! Save the bees. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're new, and if you're still rocking with us at this point in time, thank you very much. I hope you guys learned something.
Bees are our friends.
If you learned one thing,
they're not enemies.
We did our job.
Yes.
Thank you guys. We'll see y'all.